Good morning. I guess I'll call us to order. Hi, everyone. You came back for day two?
Yeah,
there from the first one. We need to do roll call. Okay. I missed yesterday, so I'm kind of rusty. No, I'll just hand it to Jessica to do roll call for the Tahoe Living Working Group.
Yep. Morning, everybody. So I'll just go through the names of the Tahoe Living Working Group first, and then we'll do the CPG second. So Brendan Ferry,
I'm here.
Emily Setzer,
here,
Linda Doherty, Jessica Wackenhut Lamelli,
here,
Courtney Wyke, Chris Wood, Cindy Gustafson, Cody Bass, Vince Honigman, Alexis Hill, Daniel Huerta. Okay, I'll mark yours here. Daniel Huerta was absent. Rob Olson,
Present.
Mia Kong, Gavin Feiger,
Here.
Jean Diaz, Aubrey Powell, Elizabeth Ballman, Petey Houston, Sarah Schmidt, Christina Kind,
here,
Sophia Heidrich,
here.
Erica Gonzalez,
She's online.
Here,
Enad Jaron Lott. Okay, so now I'll go to the CPG group. So I'll just call out the organization name. So if you're here representing that organization, please say you're here and then let me know your name. United Way of Northern Nevada and Sierra. St. Francis Assisi.
here, Flint Brenton,
Flint. Sierra Community House. Legal Services of Northern California. Advance. Lake Tahoe Community College. North Tahoe Trucking Homeless. Family Resource Center.
Here, Marimar, where is Banwell?
Thank you. Sierra Nevada Alliance. Achieve Tahoe. And the Washoe Tribe of Nevada in California.
I think that was Sierra Native Alliance and Lauren is on one of them.
Okay,
Maybe call that one again.
Sierra Native Alliance.
Yep, Lauren here, Sierra Native Alliance.
Great, thank you.
People walk through the window.
I got Chris Wood. Who else walked in with?
Members of the public.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
Are you sitting in for Daniel? right now?
Yeah, for the conservancy.
Okay. What was your name?
Marlon Charno.
Great, thank you, Marlon. Okay, that's it.
We're good.
We're good.
We don't need a forum at some point.
No.
Okay, good. I guess with that, I'm gonna welcome Chris this morning to kick us off. Am I good? Good.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to day two. For those of you that were here from with yesterday's workshop, thank you for spending more time with us again today. Today, we are going to be jumping into zoning and development standards. And so if we can go to the next couple of slides. Got to jump over there, next one. All right. So this is going to sound very familiar for those of you that were here yesterday. Over the next few hours, we have 3 hours for this activity. We're going to be digging into zoning and development standards in the Tahoe Basin. And the purpose of this meeting is to share a high-level overview on zoning and development standards, share preliminary ideas to bridge the disconnects between the project outcomes and the regional plan policy, and then capture your feedback from those preliminary ideas. You will review those ideas compared to the project outcomes. And then we're going to also evaluate the impact and ease of implementation of each idea, and then capture any missing ideas associated with this topic. And then we're going to populate the big board afterwards. Next slide, please, for the agenda. So on the screen, you'll see the agenda for this afternoon. We're gonna give a high-level overview, and then jump into more specifics. Jacob specifically is gonna walk us through the briefing book focused on zoning and development standards. And then we're gonna spend the majority of our time today in small groups, as we did yesterday, and discussion, and then do the big board exercise afterwards. And so, yeah, most of our time today is gonna be spent discussing and evaluating and sharing out together. Next slide. So here you have the overarching questions for these meetings. Before we get started, wanted to remind you that these are the overarching questions that underline a lot of more detailed conversations that we're gonna be having. And we wanna know what types of housing we wanna focus on in supporting this initiative, as well as what income levels and recommendations we should be focusing on. For example, some of what we talked about yesterday. And we also talked, we also wanted think about where in the basin there's more housing need, what kind of preliminary ideas might help us get there, and some of the ideas that might be more transformative, while others maybe perhaps more technical tweaks. Next slide. So it's important to recognize why we are here. The Tahoe Basin continues to have an unmet housing need at all income levels. This graphic shows the projected housing need from 2020 to 2026 in the basin based on a series of housing studies conducted from 2019 to 2021. And these show a projected need of over 7,000 units, with low and moderate income housing making up over half of that need. And as you think about preliminary ideas this afternoon, keep in mind the type of housing need and how the preliminary ideas might be tailored to meet those needs. Additionally, we have an ongoing study of housing needs of the Tahoe Basin, and this work is going to be completed later this year, which will have more details, more information. Next slide. And finally, as a reminder, here is the overall vision for the project, as well as our intended project outcomes. And again, you have that paper, that handout with those project outcomes with more details on that. The vision and intended outcomes will help guide our evaluations of the ideas and the recommendations that move forward in this process. Next slide. So during the second part of the Cultivating Communities process, we identified specific policy topics in the briefing book to consider and synthesize preliminary ideas and to address the disconnect between the regional plan and the desired project outcomes. We will be confirming that we captured all the ideas to date, generating new ideas and identifying the ideas to explore further during the next phase of work. And then this diagram, in the next slide, illustrates the next steps in the process. So after these joint meetings, we're gonna have a series of community workshops. We're gonna have one in the North Shore and one in South Shore in July. And we're gonna talk about the feedback that we received from the CPG, from the working group, and from the governing board later this summer. We're gonna develop a series of recommendations and take that back to the working group and the community and the CPG later this fall. And then we're gonna seek confirmation of these recommendations to initiate a code and policy revisions and the environmental impact statement from the governing board later this year. So basically, these ideas are still kind of, to be tweaked, right? That's what we're here. We're gonna make some adjustments, fine tune, and then that'll go into eventually the EIS, the environmental impact statement, for an assessment of impacts and benefits. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Jacob to take us through the briefing book content that we're jumping into today. There it is.
Thank you, Chris. All right, good morning, everyone. Looks like a better turnout, but we're also in a smaller room, so it's kind of hard to judge. So my name is Jacob Stock. I'm a senior planner at TRPA, for those who I haven't met yet. So we're here to talk about ideas for how to make Tahoe zoning and development standards more supportive of workforce housing. That's the purpose of our discussion this morning. So let's take a look at what the briefing book says about that. So you heard me talk about the briefing book yesterday. This compares our existing policies and regulations to project outcomes. And it offers some policy ideas of how to get us closer to those outcomes that we've identified for the project, those goals that we want to see at the end of this project. So hopefully you all have had a chance to at least look at the executive summary of that document. It's pretty interesting and comprehensive. It's meant to be a source to inform how we move forward with this project. So we'll be talking about that and looking at those ideas today. Can you go to the next slide? So I shared this slide yesterday as well. This lays out how TRPA's policies and rules influence housing. So you know, rules like and policies like our development rights system lay out how much housing can be built in the basin through the growth cap and through allocations. We say where housing can be built through things like zoning and also through the development rights system. We say what can be built through our development standards. So we'll be talking a lot about that this morning. Allowed uses, density and height, setbacks, coverage, and parking standards really all combined to determine what can be built here in the basin. Our regulations say who housing is for through deed restrictions in particular and deed restriction definitions and categories. And how housing is built through our processes for permitting and planning. And so I know some of you discussed that yesterday. Next slide, please. Okay, so the briefing book, I think. Yeah, one more slide over. Okay, yes. So the briefing book organizes policy areas into overarching sections with these subsections in them. And so the purpose is not to rank, what's the most important issue in our policies and regulations, but really just to lay out these categories so that we can have discussions like we're gonna have this morning. So this morning, we're gonna talk about zoning and development standards. And so that's a big topic. It includes discussion of land coverage rules, our subdivision regulations specifically for condominiums, our development standards, so like height, density, parking. We want to talk about expanded housing sites, so the areas of the basin that are zoned for housing and can we expand those options. We want to talk about accessory dwelling units. I'll be calling them ADUs from now on. And we want to talk about building renovation and rehabilitation. So taking advantage of some of that existing housing stock that we already have for affordable housing and workforce housing. Next slide. Okay, so this goes back to that, what I laid out a couple slides ago of these questions of how, where, what can we build? So zoning and development standards establish how much housing can be built through things like coverage limits and what can be built through development standards, ADU rules, etc. Also where housing can be built through, of course, zoning. So we'll be talking about that in expanded sites and through coverage and our coverage transfer rules. Next slide. Okay, so I'm gonna get into a little detail about some of the topics that we'll be discussing this morning. So let's start with an overview of land coverage. So in Tahoe, we have limits on land coverage that regulate impervious surfaces. So an impervious surface is just a surface like a paved parking lot or a building that prevents water from seeping into soil and being filtered naturally. And this is designed really to protect water quality and prevent runoff, pollutant runoff into the lake. Land coverage land coverage can be transferred. It's treated as a commodity like development rights, so it can be transferred between properties, and we have rules for that we'll talk about if you're in that group. And importantly, TRPA requires a land capability verification for every property to determine how much coverage is allowed on that property. Can you go to the next slide? So a couple issues that the briefing book identifies with our land coverage system as it relates to housing. So for one, our policies incentivize development in town centers, but a lot of town centers include sensitive lands that limit, and the land coverage system, limits what can be built there. I talked about, actually, can we go to the next slide? Because I think this is pertinent here. Yeah, so I talked about land coverage verification and land capability verification. So we have this system that was established back in the 70s, 80s, and some of the maps that we're using, some of that system is a little bit outdated and wasn't necessarily intended for use at the parcel level in the first place. So there's opportunity to update our coverage rules to better align with modern science and stormwater planning best practices to support housing as well. So that's an area of potential opportunity. Next slide. Okay, so what about development standards? So development standards can include a lot of different things, some of which are covered in the TRPA code, others are covered in local plans and area plans. But these include things like height limits, density limits, setbacks, parking requirements. These are all intended to protect the environment and scenic thresholds. You may recall that phase 2 of Tahoe Living created development standard incentives for deed restricted housing. So we have addressed this as a working group in the past for deed restricted housing. Next slide. So some opportunities identified in the briefing book related to development standards. There is an opportunity to lower the cost of workforce market rate housing through development standard incentives if the working group is interested in pursuing something like that. So there's opportunity there. So for example, density limits can reduce the potential for smaller affordable units. They can create a disincentive for smaller, more affordable units. And coverage limits can create similar limits, similar barriers, and they can force developers to build up against the height limits. All of these development standards are really interconnected. And so there's some opportunity to think about, okay, are we interested in policies that try to promote lower cost market rate housing? And if so, how and where do we adjust our development standards to do so? Next slide. Right, so I talked about incentivizing lower cost market rates. Similarly, scenic corridors often intersect with town centers, and those can limit some of the incentives that we have for height in particular. Scenic standards are a really important part of TRPA's mandate. But is there potential to improve scenic quality and support housing in target areas at the same time? I think there is personally, and hopefully we can discuss that here this morning. Next slide. Okay, so some of the other topics we'll be talking about include subdivision rules, so particularly subdivision rules for condominiums, accessory dwelling units, and rules for renovation and rehab of existing buildings. So just some quick points on these topics. Lane subdivision is not allowed, so lot and block subdivision like you'd see in most other cities and counties is not allowed in the Tahoe Basin, but condominium subdivision is. ADUs are treated the same as, well, first of all, before I get into how we treat ADUs, you know, in most other places, ADUs can be, and really in general, ADUs can be a really valuable source of low cost and scalable, affordable housing. But in the Tahoe Basin, in a lot of cases, these are treated like primary homes, so you have to secure development rights, pay, you know, relatively pretty high fees and meet coverage limitations, in order to build an ADU, and so that can diminish some of the cost saving benefits of, ADUs as an affordable housing, type. And then rehabilitation of existing homes, can trigger some permitting requirements and fees that can be a disincentive. Next slide. Okay, so here there are several opportunities to make our rules more supportive of housing. So for example, we could incentivize ADUs and reduce barriers to unlock accessory dwelling units as, again, this low cost and scalable source of workforce housing. We could also adapt our condo subdivision rules to better support affordable housing ownership types. So currently we have some rules for condominium subdivision that limit certain ownership types that we've heard from the community are desirable. So that's something that we can talk about this morning. Next slide. Okay, so just like yesterday, we'll ask you to take a look at these policy ideas that were generated through the cultivating community process so far. So we have them laid out in the briefing book, executive summary, you have them printed out on your tables as well. So what do you think of these ideas? What's missing? What would be the impact of these ideas in accomplishing our goals and objectives? As we consider this, keep in mind that anything that we pursue in through this project, anything that we bring forward as a code amendment or a policy amendment will be analyzed through an environmental impact statement, and there could be potentially mitigation. So we understand that, you know, there's some big changes being proposed here, and the environmental impacts of those are going to be analyzed later in the process. Yeah, actually, can you flip through these? Because I think we have a couple slides of these. So I'm not going to read through them specifically, but some of these ideas that are summarized in the briefing book are what we're going to be talking about, similar to the activity yesterday, if you guys were here yesterday. And so with that, I'll hand it off to Eric to describe. Yeah, or we can do some questions, yeah.
I don't think they're on our tables.
Oh, yeah, so the tables, they're on the tables you'll be sitting at for the activity. Yeah.
Okay, so now it's time for action. So we got these interactive exercises going on moving forward. So for the next few minutes, I'm gonna walk you through what we're gonna be doing. So the structure, the questions that we're gonna be considering over the next few hours. Next slide. And so we're gonna spend our time in small groups, evaluating the preliminary ideas listed in the briefing book. And then each small group will focus on a different policy sub area. So those policy sub areas you're probably already familiar with, but we've got land coverage, subdivisions and renovation and rehabilitation, development standards, expanded housing sites. And I know some of you are very interested in ADUs. We have an ADU table as well. And so once we're done discussing the policy sub areas and small groups, we're gonna have a large group report out among each of the tables. And have a brief discussion, and then we'll make final edits to your evaluations and post them on this beautiful big board right here. For the 2-hour small group discussions, if we can go to the next slide, you'll spend the first few minutes doing brief introductions, introducing each other, identifying a note taker and report back hero. And just to note, we're gonna have a mix of Tahoe Living Working Group members, community partner group members, and also community members at each table. However, we ask that the Tahoe Living Working Group or community partner group members be the report back hero, and also, if possible, the note taker. The majority of your time in small groups are going to be spent evaluating the preliminary ideas from the briefing book, and the facilitator at your table will orient you to the materials and the exercises, and then each of you are going to select 1 or 2 ideas to evaluate. So each person within each group select 1 or 2 ideas, like sub-ideas within each of the topic areas, and then independently complete the worksheet. So you're gonna have a few minutes to complete the worksheet individually, and then share with your smaller group as you go around and discuss at your table. As you go around and discuss each idea, perhaps you might make some adjustments and edits to your worksheet as you get some ideation from your fellow group members. And then as you go, you're welcome to identify any missing ideas and evaluate them at the same time, as well as what kind of adjustments could be made to the particular concept. Next slide. And so for the evaluation of preliminary ideas, we're asking you to do 3 things. So the first is we want you to identify how well the idea meets the project outcomes. So that list of project outcomes that you see here, we got more of these printed for you than we did yesterday. So evaluate the idea in relation to the project outcomes, and you'll have the opportunity to do a scaled ranking and then also descriptive text within the worksheet. And then we're also gonna ask about ease of implementation of the idea, right here, hard versus easy, and then a level of impact, low impact versus large impact, with the kind of matrix that's on the worksheet, as well as opportunity for you to put in some text in the text box. And then finally, if there's anything you'd like to change or adjust, as I mentioned, feel free to incorporate that and make any additional considerations or listening considerations as well. So next slide. So in addition to the copy of the briefing book and the project outcomes at your table, we also have the preliminary list of ideas from the briefing book. So basically like a summary of the ideas, of the concepts, the interventions from the briefing book, and a worksheet to evaluate the preliminary ideas. And then you have pens and sticky notes also to help you with the exercise, which you'll use, as you can see here. Next slide. So to make sure that things go smoothly, we ask you to abide by and follow the group agreements. So first, we want to make sure that you focus on the vision and the outcomes of the project, and to try to be as actionable and aspirational as you can be. We ask that you give everyone an opportunity to participate, and this means being aware and of how and when you participate, and recognize that we need everybody to engage in the process. So just be self-aware, step up, step back, and and then also part of the concept here with these activities is to support learning and innovation. And so just to say that this is really can be, heavy, complex themes and topics, right? Content. So part of this idea is to kind of get a little leveling up of everyone together, right? So you don't need to know everything, but hopefully through this process you can learn and grow. We ask you to kind of maintain a positive mindset, be honest, and don't talk over one another, and be generative. So if you don't like an idea, think about the ways in which you might be able to kind of like change that idea or modify that idea in order to be supportive moving forward. And then finally, as you can see here, we just want to kind of acknowledge not everyone, as I mentioned before, comes with the same level of knowledge and experience. And also not everyone knows everything, right? So we ask you to connect with your own experience, your own lived experience, recognize that each individual brings different knowledge bases, expertise to the conversation, but together, collectively, we know a lot. And additionally, we're not all going to be able to be articulate. It's early in the morning, it's going to be a long day. And so, just give yourself a little bit of grace, be comfortable, participating even if you don't have the right words, or know how to say things. Again, this is highly technical, complex, information and sometimes a lot of jargon being thrown around, right? So, part of this exercise is group learning. I want you to feel as comfortable participating as possible and just don't worry about getting all of the words right. So with that, we're gonna break up into our small groups. Eric, was there anything that I didn't mention that we should make sure to convey before we get started?
Yeah, you did a great job.
Okay,
I'll mention that everyone's class assignments are here on this piece of paper, so you can come and take a look at it and find your table. And if you're not on this list, then talk to me and I'll find a place for you, okay?
and real quick, sorry, so we had a couple of new folks join us, they didn't get a chance to introduce themselves. Elizabeth, do you want to introduce yourself? Okay.
Yeah, sure. I was on Zoom yesterday.
Denise.
I'm Elizabeth Bowman with Sarah Community House.
And part of the?
Living group.
That's Tahoe Living Working Group, yep. And Denise? Awesome. Did we miss anybody else? Anyone else online that didn't get a chance to introduce themselves?
I'll introduce myself. My name is Marlon Charno and I'm with the Conservancy. I'm the supervisor of the Tahoe Livable Communities Program.
Great, thank you. And any questions from either folks online or in our group today, in our large group today? Any clarifying questions? Yes,
Do we have a schedule break?
yes,
What time?
right after this. Yeah, I think we're breaking for lunch after this, right? This activity. So, yeah, we have lunch for y'all.
And we have some,
Or noon? Thank you.
at noon. What was that?
there are some new folks online that.
Oh, great. Okay, yes. Folks online want to introduce yourselves? Specifically, if you're a member of the Tahoe Living Working Group or the Community Partner Group. Feel free to jump in, folks online.
Antonio Valdez, Legal Services in Northern California, part of the CPG.
Awesome. Thank you, Antonio. Anyone else? Okay, let's get started.
Just one time note before everyone walks out of here, we'll do report out starting at 11:15. So if you need to know how long to evaluate ideas in your small groups, 11:15 is where we're gonna start reporting. So you got about an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, hi, everybody. So, we're gonna get started, everyone. Get your attention up here. Thank you. We have 5 minutes per group report out. We have 40 minutes total for this activity. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have, the report out from each table. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for group discussion, after which, we'll have about like 10-15 minutes or so for y'all to put up the sticky notes. And, so that's if you haven't done so already. So sound good? Any questions? All right, so we have our ADU crew that's gonna go first.
Yeah, so we did ADUs.
Yeah.
I'll say, ADU, or whatever I should do. That was a really bad joke.
No, it was.
Planners
I just
loved
added
it.
And I'm being recorded. I have to keep reminding myself of that. Catherine keeps pointing at that thing. So we are being recorded, by the way. We gave Alyssa a hard facilitation task, I'll just say. We had a really, I think a super frank discussion. I bet a lot of you did. This stuff is pretty hard. It's nuanced, it's politically challenging, it's technical, it's ingrained in the history of TRPA and the environmental protection of the basin. And I think we all still want that, but we all want more housing. And so that's this knife edge we're trying to drive through the process. And I think all these things are so intertwined and related, that we all need to keep pushing together. So we did not get to all the ADU dash numbers. A lot of them sort of overlap, I'll just say. the tenet of our discussion, I think the foundational truth of what we were all sort of seeking, and I think sort of David came at it from one side, and then Elizabeth almost came at it from the other side. I'm oversimplifying this, but we sort of like, I think they both sort of resolved almost in the same place, which is to really try to remove barriers for ADUs. And the barriers I'll talk about specifically are the need to obtain a development right for the ADU. And a development right, this is super technical TRPA stuff, but it includes an allocation, which is sort of the metering of the rate of development in Tahoe. So you need an allocation, and those come from the local jurisdictions via TRPA. And you also need a potential residential unit of use, a PRUU. You put those two things together and you get just a RUU, you get rid of the P. So you need those two things. So I think we were saying, instead of like a sliding scale for ADUs, like you need an eighth of an RUU, no RUU needed, right? If it meets an ADU requirement is our recommendation. The second thing we wanted, that I really threw on the table, is if we do that and we don't address coverage, I don't think we'll get there, because most of the lots in Tahoe are pretty small. Most people are mostly maxed out on coverage. And if we get rid of the development right and say, go build an ADU, and then they come in and they say, well, I don't have any coverage, then they can't build the ADU. So we're not gonna achieve anything. So we need to get rid of the coverage requirement, maybe within reason, you know, up to a certain X square feet for an ADU, with 1,000 square feet, pick a number that makes sense, is exempt on the part.
Average table dittos that.
Okay, so maybe we'll hear a little support on that. What else should I say? Okay, so those were two biggies. We also, you know, create pre-approved ADU plans. I think everyone said yes, and I think a lot of jurisdictions already have those. We do, I think Jessica does. Yeah, so like over the counter, a client comes in, as long as they meet that, it's like this ministerial approval, like stamp, go for it. Elizabeth talked about education. I think there were number 8, ADU 8 was a huge one in her mind. She talked about complication. Do you want to just say ADU 8? I don't know if I could capture it as eloquently as you, if you'd like, or otherwise I'll try.
Yeah, well, now I don't remember which one, but, you know, we were just saying that that's a very low hanging fruit to provide this education for anyone who wants to build an ADU, including local homeowners, make it really easy to hanging fruit.
Yeah, education, like from all sides, the builder, the renter, the landlord, the permitting process. It's sort of this full package, right? Elizabeth was talking a lot about how landlords get really frustrated. There's a lot of problems that can happen, and they'll just want to back out of being a landlord, or they'll want to rent to the easiest, highest bidder, who's someone maybe from the Bay Area that uses it as a man cave. That's the example we were using. Right? Man cave ADU, right? That sounds kind of like a dream. Full disclosure.
I think like Chris, clarifying question, we did have a related conversation about this exactly. Are you just talking about like deed-restricted ADUs, or would this be like market rate 2, or could they not even have to be rented at all? The man cave example?
Yeah, we went round and round about this. So if we got rid of the development right, then the need for the deed restriction doesn't really exist.
For the TRPA.
For the TRPA deed restriction.
As it exists right now.
Local governments have deed restriction requirements too. I think David would argue, I'll put myself in David's shoes, that if we open up the market and allow more of these to be built, then more people will be able to come into an ADU. Even if 1 or 2 are man caves, that doesn't matter, because we have so many more, because it's so much easier. If we continue to add the deed restrictions and the monitoring, it sounds like people are really upset. I'll just use that word, upset, about having to fill out the form every year. Like it's government overreach, right? I'm just putting words out there.
Yeah.
It's government overreach. I work for the government, so
Yeah.
I get that. I think that, that's one argument, is open it up and therefore we'll provide more for all, and that includes everyone, including low-income people. And these are affordable by design, right? They're smaller and therefore more affordable. So I think, should some still be deed restricted? Maybe. I think that's the nuance that maybe needs to get teased out. But I think there is an underlying tenet that I'll just caution that the more, it's like, we don't wanna remove one thing and then add two more to cover for it. And I think that happens a lot.
Yeah, we were having that discussion.
So we don't wanna take away one and add two and be like, well, we got rid of that big thing, but we're sort of covering it here. Cause that's just gonna keep adding. So where I think we're in the business of trying to remove and be, one point I thought that David made that I thought was good is he sort of drew up this huge matrix thing, talking about the deed restriction enforcement and the fact that one major thing that I think most of us still want to maintain, maybe not all of us, is that ADU shouldn't be used. Okay, I gotta get off the stage. ADU should not be used as short-term rentals. And so do we need PRPA's deed restriction to enforce that when we already have local governments with VHR, STR enforcement programs that are handling that? Because we are handling that. If people are renting an ADU as a short-term rental, we're gonna catch them. And we will handle that, so we don't need TRPA to handle that. So multiple levels of enforcement, so we can remove TRPA from that equation, free them up to do other things, and have some certainty that locals will take care of that. Is there anything I missed, you guys?
That was perfect. Well, the one thing I will add is just that deed restricted is just simple. No short-term rental, period. And short-term, and just define it in that, don't be invading people's finances, like, just keep it simple, just simple. No short-term rental.
The other thing I wanna say just quickly, like on this matrix thing, I had a checkbox up here and Alyssa probably corrected me and said it should be down here, like. A lot of this mechanically is like pretty easy, right? Like Alyssa writes 2 new lines of code in their code section and we change the rule and it's done, but. The hard part, the reason it's down here is because this is super political. That's the reality, right? So when we're scoring these, I don't know how everyone's sort of approaching that reality. Like mechanically, it's pretty simple, but realistically, I guess we should just ground ourselves in reality. Yeah, it's a sad place sometimes.
Yeah. And based on other teams, it has been a little bit of like the practicality as well as the sort of real world political elements. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause for the ADUs, everybody. We got that one out of the way. Everybody wanted to hear what they had to say, so. Yeah. Oh. Okay, go for it. Go for it. Blake, you're on.
Flint, you've got the floor.
What's the online topic, Karen?
This one was, we combined, it was coverage and development standards.
Perfect.
You're muted, Flint, I can see that.
You want to introduce yourself real quick, Flint, and then assuming you're off mute now?
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
All right, so my name is Flint Breton. I'm part of the community, the CPG, and I'm representing St. Francis, St. Vincent de Paul, and Incline Village. So in our group is Miramar and Lauren. Karen was also an active participant. So we elected to focus on 3 regulations, which we'll review here briefly, LC2, DS3, and DS6. And then we added a 3rd or 4th around Native American considerations. And that was really driven by one of our team members, Lauren. So in the interest of time, let me just kind of get right to it. So what we really our first topic was increasing coverage allowance for multi-family zone properties, which will allow us to increase available coverage for all multi-family housing that meets performance measures. And so we kind of talked through the considerations here. We felt like it was important to do this, given the outcomes. One of the primary outcomes of this working group is to make affordable housing more available to the families and individuals who meet our income requirements. So we felt like this could go a long way towards helping that. And so we talked about potential options. If we did, I think the standard max today is 30%. We thought maybe it can go as high as 50%. And so what we looked at is if we go down this path, what are some ways that it could be done? And so dealing with the water and the water filtration is a primary consideration. So what we talked about is if we expand to 50%, that we have alternative options to filtrate the water, and that we have a definitive plan that gets approved for water filtration that'll meet the needs of the environment and meet the minimum requirements of TRPA. One of which was, we gave two examples. One, which is building a basin to clean the water with the water filtration system. The other that Lauren suggested was a use of gravel so that people could park, but the water could still filtrate through the gravel into the soil. So we felt like coming up with water filtration options was the key to expanding the coverage allowance. And then in terms of, how does this meet project goals? We thought it would be high impact in making affordable housing more available for targeted income groups. We felt like that if the level of importance was also high, we felt that in order to facilitate making this more realistic, that if TRPA could work to simplify the rules, regulations, and processes to gain approval for this incremental change from 30 to 50 for multifamily housing, it would go a long way towards making it achievable. And we felt finally, in terms of, is this hard or easy? As long as the rules, regulations, and process are simplified and clarified and well communicated to others, it shouldn't be difficult. If it weren't, it would be very difficult. So that was our discussion on LC2. Miramar, Lauren, any other comments that you want to add on this particular regulation?
No, I think you cover all of that.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to DS3, which is expanding parking flexibility to market rate housing. And this really goes beyond town centers and minimum parking requirements for market rate housing projects. This is a really important consideration. And what we talked about is this really is, since TRPA has removed parking for deed restricted housing, this is limited to facilitating a parking or a parking strategy for market rate housing projects. And as you just heard in our focus on multifamily housing, this is really important to help TRPA reach its desired outcomes. So what we learned in this process is discussion, and Karen was super helpful here. The parking is a significant driver of cost for renting housing. And it costs about $500 per space per month in rent. That's pretty high. So, mitigating that, figuring out the right balance between required parking per living unit and maybe having some alternatives to adding those parking spaces would go a long way towards making the attractiveness of the economics stronger for, if we do things like multifamily housing or market-based housing. One of the suggestions we had, which I thought was a great suggestion, was, this is both from Miramar and Lauren both, that making parking optional for this market-based housing. And if we could consolidate, for example, multifamily housing into a zone where you had a zone where we had multiple multifamily housing units built, it would make it more economically feasible for TRPA to make public transportation accessible to this zone of multifamily housing units. That would reduce the need for parking spaces, therefore reduce the cost and make the viability and attractiveness and affordability for lower income families much stronger. So this idea of market-based housing zones, where you've got multiple units in one area and you make public transportation available to those zones, we think goes a long way towards helping here.
So
We-
Flynn, sorry to,
Go ahead.
Flynn, sorry to interrupt, but we have, we're kind of out of time for you. So do you have like another sort of 20 seconds or so to sum it up? And, we're running a little bit behind schedule, so each group now is gonna have more like 3 minutes to report out. So just FYI for the reporters.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much it. And, the one thing that I'll say as a placeholder here is this is the last topic, Native American considerations. This is super important. It's probably beyond the scope of this working group, but we are advised a separate dialogue be established on this topic to give it the proper amount of attention.
Yeah, and that was preserving the traditional cultural properties and resources and engaging traditional ecological knowledge.
All right. Thank you for the report out, Flynn, and also for the last word there, Lauren. Much appreciated. So let's go over, since we're in the coverage, we've been talking a little bit about coverage theme. How about we go with the other group that covered coverage?
Coverage, covering it in 3 minutes. So framing, we had, I think a lot of our discussion was framed around multifamily versus like definitions, multifamily versus market rate versus, and even including short-term rentals as a separate category. So almost all of our kind of thoughts and recommendations were around, as Jacob described it, multifamily, assuming that those are rental properties. So maybe market rate, ideally affordable, deed restricted as much as possible. But making sure that short-term rentals in particular can't take advantage of this. Because we already have a bunch of housing stock that we can get people into, right? So we don't want to make that problem worse without getting into all the other STR thoughts people have. And the other big framing concept was, coverage for multifamily housing, again, multifamily rented housing versus environmental impacts, because coverage is, and being talking about this as a whole group, I think most people know, and through the briefing book and all the education we've gotten, that coverage is one of the historically core pieces of environmental protection for water quality in Tahoe, right? So anything you do to allow more coverage needs to be compensated for, or there needs to be more science and studies done to show whether or not coverage is still that key piece of managing stormwater and water quality in Tahoe. So the big ones we talked about, maybe just keep it to the top three. Area-wide stormwater infrastructure, love the idea. It could open up a ton of options for multifamily development all around the lake while still protecting the environment. It could also apply to, market rate, again, rentable, but market rate. Difficulty, the question really is how to get it financed, how to create a financing or funding district to build the area-wide stormwater system, or who else is gonna do it. But agreeing that if we can get there, compliance and knowing how effective it is at stormwater treatment would be a lot easier than parcel by parcel if we do it right now. So a lot of benefits to it. Not sure how to get it funded. That sounds like kind of a summary.
Mhm.
The other one was increased coverage for multifamily zone properties outside of town centers. Again, kind of with the theme, potentially, as long as it's deed restricted, and not for short-term rental. Did have some concerns around conflicts with other goals in in the regional plan to direct development into town centers with the vehicle miles travel threshold to reduce driving. So if you're building multifamily, allowing more coverage could allow for more parking in outlying areas. Maybe there's some targeted areas around commercial or near resorts, so we know we'll always have employment that could be looked at. And then the excess mitigation program, definitely easy and impactful, reevaluating fees. Rob had some really good points in kind of where to shift the burden, because those mitigation fees are really important for water quality projects in every jurisdiction around the lake. So we don't want to lose that money or maybe even increase it a little bit. Short-term rentals is one he brought out in particular, that, if you change uses, you normally have to pay a fee, but if you take your house and turn it into a short-term rental, you don't pay that same fee as somebody that maybe would take a small apartment building and turn it into a hotel would have to pay a fee. So maybe it was a way to kind of shift that burden around. That was one example. And then really like the idea of streamlining the verification process. And the coverage calculations and exemptions also seem like a great idea. A question about if it would be binding or educational. Like if you use that tool, can you just be like, hey, spell out this number, I'm good? Or is it like, you're probably good, but you still need to do the study? That's kind of the question. Did I miss anything? Dave?
No.
Which I guess a lot of small things.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a lot of topics, we didn't get to all of them,
Yeah.
so.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Now let's go to the other online group. Erica, can you hear us? You ready to go? Or is Antonio
Antonio is
gonna-
presenting out for us.
Go for it, Antonio.
All right, sounds good.
What do you
Well,
think?
we covered the ADU part again. I think a lot of what the in-person group covered is kind of a lot of what we mentioned. We also covered the subdivisions. I think we talked about SD1 and developmental incentives and how, I think some good examples of how it's been helpful is like in LA where they divided single family lots, and then while we can't necessarily sell each particular lot, but having in a condo setting might be effective. Again, in terms of implementation, maybe a little bit easier, like 4 or 5 range, but impact may be more like a 2 or 3 in terms of solving housing crises, especially for vulnerable communities. But I think, as we always said, even though infill work could only go so far, it is important to still build it. We also wanted to talk, I think one thing it mentioned, having condos out in multifamily housing, maybe that might not be the best solution as it might take away the stock for affordable multifamily housing to be built. We also talked about the expanding housing sites. And we were in favor of increasing, the boundaries of town centers or kind of blurring the lines to allow more freedom, especially to build, like with in conjunction with the ADU suggested ideas. That could be helpful in terms of some of that infrastructure is already there and can potentially take on more affordable housing. Especially on single family home sites, allowing them to, kind of by right without having to pay, purchase additional RUs to build 2 to, I think, 4 units was suggested in the ideas. So quick version of what we were talking about. If Amelia and Erica want to add anything.
Nothing on my end. Thanks, Antonio.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Antonio. Good job, good job. We're gonna now go to table 4 on expanded housing sites.
We had a lot of them, so I'll kind of highlight a few. Facilitate housing on public lands was one we talked about. Some of the public lands discussed were conservancy sites, public utility districts, school districts. We definitely have landowners who want, in those categories, who want to build workforce housing. Overall, we thought this met the outcomes very well, and could be very beneficial, especially for the districts who actually already own their own land. That helps bring down the cost. We talked about expanding the bonus unit boundary, particularly for ADUs, so that more people could have ADUs in the basin. Probably a small impact, but beneficial for those folks. We talked about HS6, which is allowing 2 to 4 units in residential zone districts. The impact of this, we thought, could be high. Definitely would be a political challenge, though, because we know we might encounter a lot of neighborhoods who may not want that in their neighborhoods. But overall, we thought it should be allowed in all the zone districts, but also to be effective needs a lot of other things like scaled residential units, by right approval, more coverage, but could really increase equity and disperse workers throughout the neighborhoods around the basin. And then allowing HS4, allowing housing in commercial, industrial, and institutional areas. One of the things for institutional, such as churches, is to look at how that already is played out in California state law. I'm not sure about Nevada law, but it's already allowed in California law. So try to allow that in the basin per state law. Commercial, a lot of support for allowing housing in commercial, although some question about whether that's already allowed in a lot of the area plans. And how that may not really be a change for some regions around the lake. Also about the cost, there's a lot of cost involved in retrofitting or adding on or building above existing commercial structures. So there was some question about how effective that would be. And for allowing housing in institutional areas, we spoke about how at least in North Lake, we have very little industrial. So did I say industrial? Industrial zone districts. And wanting to protect that because we've seen a lot of incompatibility with noise and housing. So things like metal workers, boarding kennels, that type of thing. Wanting to protect the little bit of industrial that is there. And then new residential uses, HS7, overall support for including more clarity in the TRPA code of ordinances for uses like single room occupancy, permanent supportive housing, homeless shelters, residential care homes, senior housing. A lot of these uses are kind of hidden under something else and not very clear. So it's always, we thought always good to increase clarity and make that more apparent about how or where or when those uses could be allowed. Probably a smaller base of being impactful there, just because theirs are smaller populations, but nonetheless would be helpful.
All right, awesome. Thank you, and how about we go to table 3 on development standards?
All right, so I'll do this very quickly, even though we had a very robust discussion. So development standards are very different on both sides of the lake. I'll just say that. And a lot of our discussion was actually talking about putting a lot of things back in local control because of that. And so, the first one, we talked a lot. So the first two really, so align density, height, and land coverage to ensure incentives are usable, and then revised density standards. We had a lot of conversation back and forth between those two. We talked a lot about community pushback, especially on density, height. And then we talked about, so that would be more politically challenging, but we know that some jurisdictions do want that, other ones do not. For some of the other ones that we talked about, we had support for local jurisdictions establishing their own development standards. We talked about scenic corridor not having that much of an impact unless you're doing a rehab project. For clear and objective design standards for housing, we know that several of our jurisdictions already have that, and the question came up as who gets to set those objective design standards? Because if it's TRPA over the city already having them, or a county or someone else, what does that look like and who actually follows what when an applicant comes in? And then for DSA, I'll just say really quick, consider other options such as better utilizing existing housing stock. Instead of, our group all agreed that it shouldn't be instead of, it should be and. So, anything else from my group that I'm missing? I know I went really quick over a very robust discussion. We talked a lot about parking as well. And issues in communities around parking, in addition to density and height, which are very politically hot issues.
Anything else y'all want to share out?
And I can just share one point that was made in our group around equity as far as like the density and height, developmental standards, and that what they're seeing on the South Shore is that those units really stick out because other units don't have the same height requirements or density requirements, and there can be a lot of stigma around that because of the low income housing units. And so we're really looking at equity and how we reduce stigma, and think about that.
Thank you for that note, and actually, wanted to, if we have a couple minutes left, I wanted to ask about that equity questions. I know is one of the, outcomes or whatnot that was not listed on the worksheet, so if anybody wanted to kind of chime in on that as it relates to any of these policy concepts, want to give a little space for that. So our last group is table 2, subdivisions and renovation and rehabilitation.
I'm Mia. We're gonna talk about subdivisions. I know that some other folks talked about it too, but in general, the concept of SD1, partnering with local jurisdictions to explore ownership structures, was on the face very exciting because I think there's a lot of opportunities to think very differently about what ownership opportunity housing is. So I think it meets all of the objectives. However, you need to really tie this back to the financial reality and then, really turning the concept of exploration into policy. So it can't just be left in exploration and you check the box. So, essentially, and then I think what's really critically important too, is this notion to change the definition of condominiums to not just be shared single walls. That's absolutely deaf to condominiums because all of them get sued. Any builders in the room, you know that. So you can also do condominiums on land. If you can't subdivide the land, you can do condos per building. You can have separation between those buildings. So embrace everything that's happening, in addition to things like tiny home villages. Or maybe it's like we were talking about, like the old trailer park, it could be tiny home villages perhaps. And everyone owns their tiny home and you rent that slip, so to speak. So there are different ways to conceptualize what ownership could be. Also in San Francisco, you do things like TIC, tenants in commons, where you subdivide that old Victorian into 9 units. But then you don't make them go after 9 units of use, so that's like 1 unit of use. So just really streamlining, getting back to what people were talking about, streamlining and reducing the barriers. And I think, of course, the biggest impact around trust and whether or not this is really going to work. So in concept, it's a good idea, but in practicality, if you don't execute and create the policies, it means nothing. And then as far as the reduced restrictions for deed restricted condominiums, it's interesting that it seems like the only residential unit of use, if you're going to assume you're doing condos, has to be an RU. So then you're going to stick it on, whoever wants to subdivide their house into 2 units within a bonus unit, that then becomes challenging, expensive for deed restrictions. So if you own a home from 1950 that didn't have an RUU originally, let them subdivide. Let folks take that existing RUU and not add another one to it because it's already there. So maybe there's some cutoff. If it's, period before this or that, there's maybe some, or size restrictions, allow certain things to pass through the eye of the needle quicker. And I think when we also jump to, the other one we had is the building renovation and rehabilitation. So in concept, sure, waiving fees, we're all supportive of that. I think the challenge though in BRR1 is that for projects that do not increase footprint or intensity, it really hamstrings the incentive. So if anyone's going to take an old multifamily building, they have to improve it. Many times that means expansion. Maybe you're adding an elevator. Maybe you're adding a new something. You must allow people to be flexible in what their improvement is, but encourage that. So don't hamstring them into something that really completely nullifies the incentive. Expand BMP costs, assistance or delay requirements. This was something around if low-income families or small multifamily rehabilitations want to do a modest rehabilitation, maybe there's some financing for BMPs. It seems like that's there's not a lot of impact for that. I think you're basically one-off. So from a sort of impact standpoint, that doesn't seem like it's very much. And then of course, it's also, you have to tie it to, again, stormwater infrastructure, infrastructure in place. Many areas don't have this. So again, it's one of those nullified, you're doing it, but then all of a sudden you trip people up from actually executing. Implement anti-displacement policies. What I was telling folks at this table is that when you do a tax credit project or something with government funding, you have to pay relocation, period. If you're buying a motel unit and it's got people living there, you are paying that. But if you're a market rate person and you're going to buy a full motel, You don't have to pay relocation. You can just let people naturally leave and never fill them again. So maybe the protections are in place for those that are trying to do market rate projects, because the affordable side's already taken cover. Create healthy homes. We like that concept. It's really good to kind of really allow people to get their structures in order, but it all comes down to the reality of money. Nobody's gonna do this without the money to actually get it done, whether it's the money to inspect or the money to do the repairs. So maybe model something after like federal programs around energy efficiency. That's it.
Okay, we got through it. That was a lot. Yeah, that was great, and thank you all for all your this knowledge and insights. This was awesome. Next up, well, we're gonna break for lunch. Just want to make sure everybody has a chance to put their stickies up. Also, in addition to obviously noting which of the sort of these concepts, right? Like here we have DS7. Note that. Also, if you can, if you didn't already, or on your sticky notes that you have at your table, if you can note who led on that particular policy concept, just come up and write the name and affiliation, whether it was a member of the public, Tahoe Living Working Group, or community partner group. We're trying to track that as well. Eric, is there anything else that we may want to vocalize at this point other than, yay, we're going to lunch?
Well, we're coming back at 1. We'll start at 1, or as close to 1 as we can. We're gonna spend a little time, we just did a report back for about 40 minutes on this group, so I think we'll do maybe very quick report backs on the policy areas from yesterday's discussion, so that those who were not here yesterday can hear those. But we won't do this one again since everyone's here. And then we're gonna talk about the impact and difficulty matrix, so I'm gonna take some photos of it so we can stick it up on the screen. But if you want to come up during the break and just take a quick look at it, think about it, that would be great to just give yourself a sense of where the kind of the ideas landed on the board overall.
And you want these worksheets
And
somewhere?
we want all the worksheets, so if you give them to one of the facilitators or Chris or myself, or maybe just drop them on the desk in front of Jessica and Catherine on your way to lunch, we appreciate that.
Great stuff, y'all. Thank you. See you in an hour.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Welcome back. I was told that I'm not allowed to chew my food, so. Let's get going.
Yeah.
All right, so we've reached the last of the 4 sessions for our 2-day working group meeting. Thanks for sticking with it, guys. I thought it was interesting. Could you switch to the next slide, please?
Yay, planning.
Yeah, there we are in the map of it. You can see right there, there've been 4 sessions, or there are 4 sessions. We've had 3. This is the 4th one, so it's the last. And in keeping with the mini conference theme, we're calling it a closing plenary. So we're all coming together and we're gonna talk about some of the big questions, big themes that came out of our discussions from the rest of this 2-day meeting. Can you switch to the next slide? Okay, yeah, here's the agenda. So pretty much just said this, but an important takeaway is that we'll be going back and just reviewing, the work that we've been doing the last 2 days. So next slide. Okay. And yeah, what's coming out of all of this? So we'll take the ideas that we discussed here today, some of the big picture recommendations, direction. If there's any ideas that we want to prioritize as a group, we'll take those and we'll vet them with the community at the community workshops in July. We'll have a different process for the community, but the same idea of kind of vetting these ideas that we've talked about today. Meanwhile, us, TRPA staff, Ramey staff, and other consultants will start to study some of the direction that you guys give us or the recommendations you guys give us and some of the ideas that you highlight. We'll start studying those and start coming up with a plan of how we turn these ideas into actual policy and code recommendations. Yeah, Rob, are you in there?
Are we able to, after the dust is settled from today, email you a separate list of
as we've kind of been letting it simmer and think about it, would that be okay?
No, I'm turning off my email, so deactivating it. No, of course, you can
Yeah.
you can always send me your ideas. I feel like I can teach Rob.
No,
You can always send me your ideas by email, or you can call me. I love calls, or if you want to set up a meeting,
Yeah.
whatever you want to do, like, this isn't set in stone after
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
This is just giving us a little more direction to move forward.
Yeah, I just want
with
everyone else to know, like, cause stuff comes up later, like,
Of course.
the next day, you're like, oh my God.
Of course, this has been an intense couple days of like really
Yeah.
talking through stuff, and it'll take a little bit of time for us to process all of it, and I'm sure you're gonna have more ideas, hopefully, you know, walking around, taking a shower, whatever eureka moments, just give me a call or send me an email.
Thanks, honey.
So, yeah, I'm not in the shower. Like I said, things are sure to change a bit. Kind of like we were saying, things are gonna change, but this is just the start to get us moving in that direction towards recommendations that we can eventually bring to the board and bring back to you guys to vet. And then, you know, by November, December, the end of this year, we're gonna hopefully have a package of recommendations, have a pretty good idea of what we're gonna bring forward for an environmental analysis. Next slide. Okay, so, just wanted to return quickly to these overarching questions for these meetings. I talked about these yesterday at the beginning of the day, and I know we've all touched on these in our conversations throughout the last couple of days. But yeah, these big questions, who is this project for? What types of housing do we want to create? Are we just looking at deed restricted housing? Do we want to look at ways to lower the cost of market rate housing as well? Do we want to do a combination of both of those things? And how does this impact the policy solutions that we pursue? What are some of the, maybe some of the mitigations, like for short-term rentals, that need to be put in place? So, some of these questions, hopefully we can talk about this afternoon. And then how does this all relate to our vision and our outcomes for this project? And that's all I have, I believe. Yeah, could you switch to the next slide? Yeah, it's Eric's turn.
All right, great. Thanks, Jacob. Hi, everyone. Eric Yerkovich with Ramey and Associates. Nice to see you all stayed through the last closing plenary. We're actually going to try and kind of move the facilitation forward pretty quickly over the next hour and a half, so that maybe we can leave a little early today, since we've all been in this room for a long time together. So I just want to note that as we go through this, to maybe make sure that as we go through our report backs and our discussions, that we're concise and clear, and we're not overly communicative at this point in time. So before we get started, in our group discussions that we're gonna do, we're gonna focus a little bit, as Jacob said, on the ideation you guys have been doing and the analysis and evaluation of the different ideas. Before we do that, I wanna get Jessica and Rob, who have very nicely volunteered to share out what their groups talked about yesterday. So Jessica was in the development rights policy area, Rob was in the process, cost, and housing policy topics area. So we'll give them a few minutes just so you, for those who weren't here yesterday, can just hear a little bit about what they say. And once we do that, we're gonna then kind of go through and talk about the ideas that are on the board here today.
Why should come up?
Go ahead.
How many hours? So as he said, we had development costs, and ultimately, I think there were some language issues that we wanted to work through, that the way terms were used might not be the best. So I think ultimately we need to do some wordsmithing. All the ideas look good. I mean, I think we've noted, like, everyone was kind of in this range to begin with a lot of what we were talking about. And there was broad support in adjusting fees.
to build trust and fairness for workforce housing. And then like where could that money come from? Because obviously planners need to be paid. We've got, you know, certain things that need to be mitigated. And a couple of us were talking about short-term rentals. And I just did some quick math real quick. Basin-wide, there's 4,560 STRs in the basin with an average size of maybe 1,500 square feet. Maybe that's conservative, but that's 6.8 million square feet in the basin. If you were in a town center, for instance, and building a commercial thing, and you had a hotel or a like apartment building, and you were converting that into you had housing, and you were converting that into a hotel, you'd have to pay $5.12 or $5.13. So at that 6.8 million, that times the 513 would be $35 million that TRPA has not collected for converting residential properties into commercial enterprises. So that's a big chunk of where some money could be coming from right there. And then we, you know, looking at how you scale the fees, how to make it more fair to incentivize it. And then we were going into housing occupancy, which also touched on short-term rentals. And there was, you know, again, more broad support of shifting incentives in that regards for not just the cost, but also the housing occupancy. And not looking to penalize someone that's trying to have a big home, but how do you make it fair and try to encourage the development that we're needing? Not that we're wanting, but what we're needing in the area. So so not looking to use the word disincentivize, because we feel like that could be a very litigious word if we're putting that out there. And so I don't know, is there anything else from our groups? Yeah. So
There was another table that I don't know if Elizabeth and Eric, if you guys just had anything in your table that you wanted to.
that talked on those topics or?
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean,
I don't know if I have much to add. I can pull up my notes and.
but you could look at it real quick. Well, just, you know, drilling down on these things, I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. So whoever put together the workbook, you know, it's good.
All right, thanks, Rob.
Yeah.
Jessica, why don't you come up and Alyssa will come back to you if you want to add in.
I have a co-presenter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry.
You want to go first? Go for it. Okay.
Do introduce yourselves too.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I work at the city of South Lake Tahoe. Emily Setzer, I work at Placer County, Vice Chair of Tahoe Living Working Group. Yeah. So our topic was development rights overall. So my group focused on the actual development rights. We don't have them up there, so I might get lost a little bit. But we talked a lot about many of the different policies. We need more details to really understand what the full impact or where on the scale it would be. So the first one that we talked a lot about was actually scaling the development rights to do it based on square footage versus just the overall development right. And so we talked about how hard it would be to implement that, to change the entire system and how that would shift. And we talked a lot about, would it create more confusion for the public when they've already been used to the development rights system as it does exist already? Or would it create more transparency because it's actually tied to something? Some of the other ones we talked, a big overview of our group as well was talking about similar to what this group just mentioned, which is who's living in these locations. So a lot of the focus was on being a local resident. Talked about if development rights are actually the barrier to entry for a lot of these developments, or if it's just one of the many issues in the system going towards the development in general. And then for some of the other ones, we talked a lot about, as I mentioned earlier for the group this morning,
we did talk about the difference between market rate versus just allowing deed restriction and some of those types of things. And the differences between the different sides of the lake and what those communities need or want. Oh yeah, and something else that we talked about was providing options for locals to create more community wealth. And so if we have primarily just deed restricted housing, people are not allowed to move up. You have to stay in that deed restriction a lot of times. Oh, so by creating these different types of housing, how do they move up? And then something else I brought up that I think the ADU group kind of mentioned earlier today was there's already a lot of housing that doesn't have any coverage or development rights that are associated with it. So it's out of conformance, it wasn't done legally. And so by creating these pathways, it would bring them into conformance and we'd create more quality housing.
And then my group talked about residential units of use and residential bonus units. There was not a lot of support for a carrot or stick performance-based approach for jurisdictions receiving their residential units of use, mostly because it's not equitable to the community residents, even though it's more like punishing the local government jurisdiction, but it's not fair to the actual residents of each community. We talked about the improving access to residential development rights for multifamily properties. And supportive of that overall, but and potentially a centralized bank, but it would have to be clear and objective on how that works. For residential bonus units, as far as streamlining and clarifying steps to residential bonus unit access, such as publishing clear criteria, scoring systems, eligibility, we're all for that. Overall, just making it as objective as possible and making it very clear as for if you're developing like how and when you will get your bonus units. For as far as revising criteria for the bonus units and to understand the market value, like conducting feasibility studies to better understand market value of bonus units. I think feasibility studies would be interesting to understand what size of units and what types of units have been built today. That could help inform future allocations. I think the big thing out of this discussion was the potential for expanding residential bonus unit access. And there was support for bringing over units from the RUU pool into the residential bonus unit RBU pool to show a clear commitment that instead of them being kind of even, like this amount is for what's likely going to be second homes, this amount is for workforce housing. If we actually have a clear commitment towards we need workforce housing in the basin, bring more over into that pool. There was support for that.
Oh, and I have one last thing. Another idea that was brought up in our group yesterday was stopping the conversion of CFA to RUUs.
Single family.
For single family.
There was support for that.
Yes.
Great, thank you both, Emily and Jessica. Thanks. Melissa, is there anything you wanted to add to the conversation from earlier?
Yeah, from yesterday, our group was development process and planning process. And I think kind of the key takeaways for me, and Eric, feel free to chime in, but there was consensus that we need to make it clear what is dictated in area plans and what is dictated in TRPA code. And we should have one process for changing area plans. So, for example, like if Washoe County wants to do a density change in their area plan, they should be able to do that and go through that process and then not have to come through the full TRPA process. Because it's the way that it's set up right now is pretty duplicative, and a huge burden for both the local jurisdiction staff and TRPA staff. another idea that came out of the development process was, around like a streamlined environmental review for projects. So through this process, we're planning to do an EIS. And so there was support for, we were calling it like a pre-approved environmental, like, IEC, for projects that come down the pipeline after this, after the cultivating community project is complete. But basically it would be like an environmental review that, is almost complete and like developers could just fill in their site-specific information and, go through the process instead of having to hire like expensive environmental consultants to do a brand new environmental review. So something like that, and we didn't know exactly how that would work, but just an idea. I think those were kind of my big two.
Yeah, the general theme of moving towards more local control and less of the dual permitting process, that was appreciated, but recognize that it may be difficult, large benefit, lots of difficulty. For the development process and planning process, there are many times when the word clarify or simplify is used. And every single time you see clarify or simplify, we should just say, yeah, let's do that. Because it's huge benefit and not too difficult. So, all the clarifies and simplifies are yeses.
Great, thanks. All right, well, appreciate everyone reporting back in their groups over the last couple of days, taking notes, being part of the process, because we're all here supporting one another. You can go to the next slide. So for the next few minutes, we're going to talk about, I don't know how well you can see that, it was a little hard to see on my screen. We're going to talk a little bit about the exercise you did about impact and ease, and I'll walk through this just a little bit. And share some of the results of it, and then we're gonna have a discussion about that at kind of a high level. And then I would encourage you all, if you want, feel free to kind of wander up here and look at this, if this is a little too hard to see. This quadrant here, I took a picture of, is this quadrant here. So it's some of the easier ones that were identified, as well as the most beneficial, having the most beneficial impacts. I'll just say, and I don't know if everybody knows this, we color coded the notes. So the development standards and zoning groups are these teal ones. These kind of peachy color ones are the kind of housing occupancy and models one. These yellow green are development costs. These pink ones were from the development rights group. The purple ones were development process. I think I got all the colors. So on the board, you can see how people place them based on the policy area overall. So you can kind of see there's a general consensus that a lot of these ideas have a good amount of impact on some level. And then there was a discussion, and Brandon brought this up this morning, that, you know, the question is really how hard a lot of these things may be, and maybe we can write the code language really simply, but it might be a big political lift to implement. So I think when we think about the categorization of all of these, we also need to think about, well, we were maybe only evaluating them on certain dimensions. There are going to be more as we get into the details of these, about how hard they are to do, complicated, what their impacts are. But this gives us a general sense of the effectiveness that you all thought that these had and how complicated they all were. So this is the top quadrant. You can see there's a number, quite a lot of the ones that were kind of easier and had higher impact were sort of in the zoning and development rights bucket. So those teal ones, you can see there's a number on land coverage. There's a bunch around ADUs in that top coverage, some on development standards themselves, and then some on expanding housing sites. These pink ones were some of the ones around the development rights program and development's pool. We had some on cost that are in here as well as housing occupancy. So you can kind of see that's what we're identifying as highest impact, beneficial impact, kind of lowest bar to implement. We'll get the next one, and this one just goes down the list. So still the highest impact, but now we're at 3 and 2 difficulty. So these are getting harder as we go. So now we see a few more of the pinks in here, the development rights pool start to show up more. You get some around process that start to show up here more, cost ones start to show up more. So you can see these ones are identified both as being really beneficial, but getting a little bit harder to implement overall. You can go to the last one. Oh, never mind, there's not a last one. So that gives you kind of a sense of where we landed, and you can see this bottom quadrant. Again, some development standards, a little bit of rights, and some housing occupancy ones. So some of these housing occupancy ones were considered a little bit harder, but higher impact as you kind of go down the spectrum. So again, those are the colors, they're color coded on the screen, so you can see that coordinate with these colors up on the wall. Feel free to come up here at any time if you want to do that. We're just gonna have a reflection for about 45 minutes, and we're gonna focus primarily on the first 2 questions that are up there. One, we're gonna talk a little bit about how we want to focus our policy interventions. And Jacob just mentioned this a few minutes ago, it's come up in a lot of groups. So are we focused on deed restricted housing? Are we talking about reducing the barriers to market rate housing, mixed income housing, or all of the above? We're gonna have a little conversation because that direction is gonna help us refine the particular ideas that we're looking at. And the second real question we're gonna kind of tackle is, which of these do you think are the most transformational across all of the policy areas? So the ones that really can have the biggest effect to help us meet our intended outcomes for this project overall. Now, we'll focus on the first question first. So who, the type of housing we're focusing on in these interventions. And I just like to kind of open it up again, try and be concise in your comments. We'll open it up first to working group and CPG members, and then members of the public who are here participating as well. We'll have an opportunity to talk as well. But just remember, there's a number of us, we all want to give people an opportunity to talk, so keep your remarks concise. We're gonna go Mia first, and then I think I saw another here.
So one more nuance in that first question, rental housing or ownership housing? So market rate, you assume is ownership, but it also could be rental, right? So I think the other distinction is the goal low income rental housing of 60% of AMI and below, which tends to be what the objectives were early on. That's a very specific financing type. That's tax credits. That's 9%, 4% tax credits, very expensive. Then there is also the forced sale deed restricted. So, which is harder to do, but something that is also out there. So, and that builds equity for me. So I just think those distinctions are important.
So great distinction, Mia. So as you're thinking about this question, also think about ownership versus rental as well. So thank you for that addition. Who would like to kick us off?
Hi, Eric.
Hey, Eric.
I think we should focus on the deed restricted or rental lower income housing. But I think that we have also discovered over the last couple of days that there are that there are costs associated with the market rate, development of market rate housing that might just be unfair or unnecessary or not. Yeah, that we can't provide a good answer for why we're doing that to somebody. So if we've really discovered something on the market rate side that we say, yeah, but we cannot articulate the public purpose behind that, then we should change it. But that shouldn't necessarily be the focus. I think our focus should be on the what we tend to call employee housing and lower income housing.
Great. So the focus on deed restricted rental will clean up the market rate. Anyone want to add to that? Rod, then Emily.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that I'm always, like, when I've been here the last 2 days, it's just focusing on workforce housing. I appreciate there are avenues for market rate housing to have some options, but if we can, like, we don't have all these stormwater treatment facilities, we don't have all this stuff yet. Let's try to focus on what's gonna help that workforce housing first. But if it is a blended project, then maybe then it can help those other, you know, mixed use projects and stuff like that by, you know, helping out the one. Right, if that makes sense. So, there, you know, others can kind of come along with it and benefit from it, but let's focus on that stuff first.
Great, thanks, Rob. Emily, then Mia, then hold your comment there.
Placer County just adopted or approved its housing action plan. And in that, the county decided to focus on anything that's not a non-deed restricted single family. So focusing on multifamily apartments, even if they're not deed restricted. Any types of duplex, triplex, missing middle types of housing, ADUs, and then also anything deed restricted. So basically anything that's not a market rate single family home, because we know we have needs in all of the categories.
Thanks, Emily. Mia, then Justin.
Yeah, I think that, that there also is a important aspect of financing that just needs to say elephant in the room. So bonus units do not build housing. You know, you need the money and the financing to keep those units affordable. So what might also be a consideration is, are there other types, kind of along the lines with what Emily just said? You know, whether it's, factory built units, maybe doing lots of tiny homes rather than one individual apartment. You know, being open to different housing models and types to bring down the cost of the housing, to then make it affordable. Because if it costs less to build, it will be more affordable to own or to rent. So, you know, I think when we're just stuck with deed restricted, it must be 60% or below, it must have, you know, everything in the kitchen sink, you know, workforce, they must gotta work 30 hours, they have to be this, it becomes incredibly complicated. And so maybe some of this is unpacking all these restrictions and figuring out of these restrictions, what's preventing the thing from happening. You know, so maybe if it is just, you know, maybe then it's garage remodels, ADUs, maybe it's, you take the sunroom and you turn it into a bedroom. I mean, it's really finding unique ways in Tahoe that you can bring this housing to light in a much faster way without as much complication.
Thanks, Jessica, and then
Elizabeth.
So the city, along with what Mia's saying, is advocating for focus on market rate. The city has produced a lot of deed restricted housing, and similar to what Mia said, we know that deed restrictions come with a lot of risk for financial reasons, and we know that a lot of the model types that people are coming in, we offer development rights for free. Most of those people, they don't want to get bonus units because it creates further restrictions for them and creates more risk and less certainty. And so the city wants to advocate more for market rate and for more of these innovative housing types that we see coming in, but we're not able to process.
Yeah, also echoing that idea of those creative options, you know, we see that mobile homes are surprisingly popular housing product. And, you know, people could own their cabin and not necessarily pay rent on the land. Those kind of alternatives, we know people really like that.
thanks, Elizabeth.
So is this kind of the affordable by design or affordable by plan?
Yes,
concept?
correct.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks. So I think Mia and Jessica and Elizabeth kind of talked about that affordable by design, different housing types, smaller housing types that could fill that niche.
I don't know, I'm not gonna articulate this very well, but I agree with affordable by design, but I do have some like concerns around it, and that I think we have, and I'm just speaking for North Shore. In the future, we have lots of really small homes that would be affordable by design, and they're still not affordable for the workforce, and they need a lot of rehabilitation that is also not affordable, and so, I don't know enough to know, but I just caution us in that, and that there still needs to be a mechanism that they stay affordable for work.
Great, thank you. Sophia, and then I'm gonna ask if there's anyone online who wants to chime in, and so I'll set you three.
Yeah, I just would say that I agree with that and that I think we should be focusing on the most needed housing types, which are for local workers. I think we're all concerned about having more housing go to second homes or to STRs, and so if we can address that piece of it, I think that's what this effort should really be focusing on, especially like providing such big incentives, and there's a lot that we've talked about, and there are some really great ideas. But if we're gonna open up those things that might create other potential impacts, then I think we need to be really thoughtful and focused on exactly what kind of housing we need and want. And so I would advocate for deed restricted housing.
Is there anyone online who'd like to share their thoughts on the type of housing, deed restricted, market rate, both? And then also the question of ownership versus rental.
I think it might just be a couple of us left online. I'll just go ahead and say, I do think the policy interventions do need to target people who are marginalized and who are most impacted. For me, that does look more like a deed restricted, but I hear about how that is a barrier in itself. So whatever that looks like, but mainly probably deed restricted. Or lowering the cost of market rates generally, just to allow entry to access. And I am thinking in terms of rental more than ownership.
Great, thanks. Is that Erica, I think?
Yeah.
Anyone else online?
Eric, can we clarify what we mean by deed restricted?
Just make sure there's no one else online. Anyone else?
Amelia's not coming off mute, so no.
Sorry, I thought it was restricted to people in the working group. So I was waiting for the public.
Okay, Amelia, hold on a second. I'll come back to you. How about that? All right, sorry, I can't see who's online, so I'm not sure who's there. So I'll come back to you. So who wants to describe to Eric what some of the deed restrictions are here in the Tahoe Basin?
Well, so for me, when I said I support deed restriction.
Yeah.
Talking about what the current TRPA 3 tiers of restricted housing.
Right.
I'm not talking about HUD supported subsidized housing where we are looking at 80-60. And where we're talking about that type of deed restricted housing.
I think.
So I'm talking about the fully expansive 3 tiers that TRPA has, which I think. Really some of that is kind of on the edge of market rate, right? It's really, there's some overlap there.
Achievable.
Exactly. So I wanted to, when I'm saying that I support that full breadth that TRP has described, and I think that really begins to bring in the support for alternative housing types. And so I think those go together. If you don't define deed restricted as only that 80 or 60%.
Below it.
Ditto.
Agreed. I want to let's do this as a kind of a rule. So if we're talking about deed restricted housing, we're generally talking about those 3 categories that TRPA uses. If you're using it in a different way, just flag it and say it out loud.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Eric. That's good. That's a good distinction. Is there anyone else from the working group or CPG who want to shout out? Otherwise, I'm going to give folks who are from the public. There are folks who from the public are waiting. Brendan, and then I know Emily had her hand up, and then we'll get you next.
And I think I agree largely with what's been said, but I would support what the economic analysis says will work or what will really produce the housing. And also what we want to invest our political capital on, because I think at the end of the day, this is going to be a big political lift for TRPA's board. And so we should spend that capital wisely.
Biggest bang for the buck.
Emily?
Totally agree with what Brennan said. I just want to throw out another idea because I think it also addresses something the city is looking for is and something that Sonia mentioned is just a non-STR deed restriction. I mean, sometimes I think if that's gonna get stuff built, it's kind of getting us to where we want in the 80% range.
Great.
Short-term rental, vacation home rental.
Thanks, Chris. All right, any other, okay, so Gavin, Gavin, and then, Mia, and then I'm gonna go Nick, Amelia, and then Bob, is that right?
I'm gonna test on this later.
No, but you're gonna have to remember your order. I'm not gonna remember it.
Yeah, just quickly, we just kind of reiterating what, you know, from the league's perspective, same thing in phase two. Like very interested in trying to find ways to give incentives, including coverage, density, height, all that stuff. For the type of, for like housing that we need, and for town center development. So I think there's a lot of overlap potentially in this bonus unit boundary area of, you know, giving those incentives to deed restricted rentals and for sale homes, and then almost anything, maybe almost anything in town centers. Is where we'd be leaning towards, and I think that would limit the environmental impacts to probably like being passable. If you start including a lot of market rate and kind of everything, I think it's gonna like potentially blow up the environmental analysis too, so. As far as just being feasible goes, I think it's be a little bit limited.
Great, thanks, Gavin. Yeah, I think you're next.
I would just say something.
Me?
Yeah, I think
Okay,
so.
great. I just want to throw out that I think everyone favors low income, deed restricted, make it affordable to the workforce. I just want to put the preface that in order to make that happen, there needs to be local government subsidy that goes into it, because the costs are the costs, right? We all know that. Infrastructure to build, that's all very expensive. So when you say below market rate, that means that it's gonna cost you more than what you're gonna take in, right? Because it's deed restricted affordable. So that isn't for everybody's flavor, right? And it doesn't just work because you want it to work. It works because you have finance. So I just want to say, if this is truly a goal, then financing has to be a part of this conversation. It cannot just be about coverage and RUUs. That's not enough to move the needle.
Great, thanks. And I think we've heard a mix of folks who are interested in deed restricted and then deed restrict or non-deed restricted, especially incentivize those naturally affordable types. And Gavin even brought into the conversation town centers themselves, so being more liberal in town centers themselves.
But let me just say too, achievable means you're at 220. So you're six figures, your house is $600,000. So that's what achievable bonus units are getting you today.
They don't have any restriction cap.
They don't have restrictions.
It's only local.
Oh, I thought you had to do the 220.
They can be
Oh,
seven figures.
I missed that. Okay, well then, top of the market, that's how you finance it, right? So when you're doing bonus unit for sale, you're at the top of the market for
But
that product.
I'll just say, even with the Achievable project, they did reach out to us to help finance for it. So.
Okay, great. Thank you all. Now I'm gonna go to members of the public who are very nicely waited, and we're gonna go Nick, Amelia, and then Bob. And then if anyone else has any comments as well.
I think it's great to build deed restricted housing of the various different types, and I agree with Mia's point about the need to have those financial incentives. One of the challenges I've seen is when we offer these policy incentives, it can lead to something counterintuitive where we want to encourage development to be in town centers, to be more dense, to be more walkable and that sort of thing. But we're only allowing that for deed restricted properties. And so if you say that market rate properties cannot be as dense or as walkable, then you're gonna end up seeing market rate development that is not as dense and as walkable. And so there's a competition between these transportation priorities and also this desire to create an incentive for deed restriction. And so again, to Mia's point, if there's any way to offer a financial incentive for deed restriction, then you can open up those design parameters for all types of housing.
Thanks, Nick. Amelia, and then Bob.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. So I think there's just been some really great comments made, and the ones I'm most in line with are the ones that really focus on local control and having the TRPA get out basically of the way of blocking projects that are in line with these goals that we're all talking about here. So essentially, unless we're able to really put a dent on the financing piece, and unless the TRPA is really serious looking at taking that on, in which case then absolutely would love to consider more deed restrictions. But without that, I think would love to see the policy focus stay on allowing the local vicinity, like, you know, the city and the counties to move forward with the projects that are in line with the area plans, that are in line with this, with with these goals all stated here that are currently being blocked by TRPA policies and lifting those restrictions.
Thanks, Amelia. Bob?
Yeah, I agree with Amelia in the principle. The TRPA needs to say yes. They need to release their grip on a lot of the restrictive policies and procedures and say yes. Now, the ADUs were a great vehicle for that, and we talked about that before. I won't get into it, but it's, yeah, that's a good overall theme. Flip the script. Let TRPA be known as the yes group. All right, now, the point I was gonna make though about the deed restriction. I was able to meet a family that I hadn't seen in a long time while I was doing some canvassing in Midtown, South Lake Tahoe. And this was in the fall. And I hadn't seen these people in a long time. They bought a deed restricted house 20 years ago. And it was made by the
St. Joseph Community Interest.
no, it was, come on now, St. Francis Land Trust. Okay, and they bought this house and they did, and it was deed restricted, so they were able to get in on it, pay less for it, right? Now, they've raised their children, the children have moved out, and they have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, but it's just the two of them, they're aged. They don't need a house this big, so they look to sell it and.
So I'm gonna ask you to stay focused on this question.
Okay.
And just kind of narrow your comments down on this question.
Okay, deed restriction has, at the end of it, there's something waiting, and that is a lower sale price. In this case, it was $200,000 under market. They're not upset about it. These people are terrific people. They say, I guess we're just staying here for a long time till we're forced to move out because of either sickness or death in the family or something, you know. But they were happy with what they had, but they had a constant knowing that, hey, their house is not going to be able to sell for close to market value. Now, the benefit is though, when they finally do sell it.
Okay, thank
then
you, Bob.
it'll be
I'm gonna move us on to other folks as well.
Of course.
We want to give everyone an opportunity to share. We haven't heard from a few folks who are in the room. And I'm gonna maybe call on a couple of folks just to see if you have any thoughts. Chris, we haven't heard from you. Denise, we haven't heard from you. Marlon, we haven't heard from you. But if any of you want to share any of your thoughts or ideas as well on this particular question, we'd love to have them here. Go ahead, Chris.
I'll try to stay on point. Not that I have the story I want to tell that I know it's off point. But the housing type, whether we want to focus on deed restricted housing or we're going to cost the market rate. I'm thinking about Incline Village, which is where I'm from, and I think that there's concern in the village about the WTAP, as we call it, Washoe Area Plan, Tahoe Plan, that it won't actually encourage workforce housing. That it will be open to market forces and they will come in and maybe add some deed restricted housing, but they'll take advantage of the market availability of the plan at the high end, the achievable. And will actually go negative on how much more workforce housing we need. So 8 market units and only 2 workforce housing units will actually be going backwards. So there's that kind of concern. I think that deed restriction is one way to answer that problem, but will that pencil out for any kind of developer? So further thought is, I think it would be good to hear from maybe a panel of developers how they would work with this WTAP in Incline Village or any community here. How could they make that work with deed restrictions?
Great, thanks, Chris. There's a number of folks in here who might be interested in that panel. Marlon and then Denise, if you all want to share.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think focusing on the achievable housing aspect and making it financially a bit more interesting, looking at some of the fees and how to reduce those for those types of projects, because there's a lot of fees associated with TRPA and also the way the Conservancy is working with us, it's also a financial burden at times. And so just looking at, there's excess coverage mitigation fees, development rates that you potentially have to pay, well, no, those are bonus units, but just looking at the various fees and how to reduce some of that burden in order to make this financially pencil out better.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Well, I'll just say I agree with mostly everyone here. I think we should focus on the restricted housing. I try to look at these issues through an advocate lens and thinking of the work that we do at Sierra Community House, the community that we serve, and we definitely see the higher need for lower income units and for larger units for large families.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. So I'm gonna shift us now to look at the second question that is up on the board, which is, what do you think the most transformational idea that you looked at or talked about during the last 2 days is? You all actually have the ideas list, I believe, on your table, so if you need to thumb through it again to remind yourself of what it is. But again, just take a minute to think about it for a second, and then we just had this nice conversation about deed restricted housing and maybe a focus on that with idea that we might want to encourage more of the naturally occurring affordable housing for those households who are maybe slightly higher income level. So just to think about the policy idea within that framework too of the folks that we were just talking about. So I'll give you a second. Karen's passing out the ideas list. And then I'm gonna ask again for comment from the working group and the CPG first, and then I'll get folks from the public to weigh in as well. Brendan, then Eric. Start us off.
I would say, what I mentioned, my rambling ADU talk, removing development right requirement for ADUs at the minimum, but looking at a scaled model, if that's where you go. And then removing the coverage barrier. I don't think if.
You mean cost also, like for buying coverage, like if you do 50 and you gotta transfer in 20%, about the cost of that?
I don't know if that's enough, because like I said, we have these small lots. Most parcels, I think, are pretty maxed out on coverage. So if you want to build an ADU and we remove the development right requirement, but you still don't have the coverage, you can't do it. So some coverage exemption, 1,000 square feet, whatever it is, it's got to be based in reality again, because like, do they need a driveway, all this stuff, but to me, it's got to be those two things together, and if that doesn't happen, I don't think we'll build more ADUs here.
Great, so the transformational idea around ADUs, it's actually a two-parter.
Yeah.
Wait, sorry, and just, I missed the first thing you said, is that going to like just a no SDR, these restrictions, is that what you said, or did you say something?
The development right, getting rid of the.
Oh, getting rid of the development, okay.
Eric.
Thank you. If you want to use the word transformational, I think the most transformational ideas are the ones that suggest more local control. And moving towards, I think really all those taken together, what those mean is moving towards a more traditional model of regional planning and local planning. Those ideas taken together would be extremely transformational to the way things are now. And I think they would be very powerful. And so we talked a lot about all the costs that you would save, things that we all like to talk about, the time that you would save, the expenses that you would save, the more certainty, the more local community building and local accountability. Those are things that we talk about a lot, and we all can kind of spit those out when we're talking about moving towards a little more local control and what some of the problems we have with the way it is now. one of the bigger benefits I really see that we don't talk about is turning this all into more of a local workshop of ideas so that we can each respond more rapidly, that we can each be more flexible and see what each other is doing in response to their problems. We could move more rapidly and more purposefully towards our own individual issues. And that becomes, it is an experimentation. We could experiment with an idea. We could say, hey, let's try this. Let's just try it. And if it doesn't work, well, we won't do it. We'll do something else. So I've mentioned this a couple of times, and I don't mean it to be rude. Washoe County wants to be the best partner we can be with all of the local jurisdictions, as well as with PRPA. We really want to be a good partner to all of you. But we leave countless ideas on the table. We leave countless discussions on the table because we don't want to deal with what would take to go forward. We just say, oh, that's gonna require what? We're gonna have to deal with TRPA this, we're gonna have to hire a consultant for that. Forget it. And it's left on the table, and I suspect we're all doing this. And if we could just have the ability to respond rapidly and flexibly and try out ideas, that would be extremely transformational.
And that's not applied to any specific idea we talked about today, but just as a framework in which all of these ideas.
There are many of these ideas that start out with or suggest in the language of the idea of local control.
Yep.
So that's what I'm talking about.
Me and then anyone else from the working group and CPG, Mia, Emily, Jessica, we'll hold you Bob till the end, Rob.
Okay, let me just preface by saying not all jurisdictions are the same. Working with each one is very cumbersome, so just so you know, they all have their differences. But from transformational, from an affordable housing developer who has built many affordable housing units in Tahoe, I think coverage is critical. So we talked about it with the ADUs. You know, we last year's working group, you know, we all know 30% coverage on a class 7 piece of land is never possible for anything more than a single family house. So if you're gonna zone something multifamily, I would like the priority to be the zoning. I would like there to be a hierarchy. So if the goal is density and more housing, and you can do 15, 24 units to the acre, that takes precedent. So you can achieve that zoning density on that site, meaning you don't need to get 24 RUUs, because one RUU will get you all 24 units. Just think about it. People have built 20,000 square foot homes in Tahoe, right? With more than 10 bedrooms on one RUU. So conceivably, it's similar.
Sounds like a nice house.
I know, just saying, no, so that's one thing. The other one is, we didn't talk about it at all, and it wasn't on any of the ideas, is this notion of with the bonus units that happened last year, you can do 70% coverage. But you gotta go find the coverage on the black market or the CTC and buy it and go through an EIR and then buy the coverage and then pay to transfer it in. That whole business, in my opinion, is cumbersome, difficult, and designed to kill deals. So if you're gonna do anything transformational, if you're gonna do 70% coverage, you don't have to go buy the coverage from someplace else and transfer it in, go. So if you're doing multifamily, go. So I like this idea if someone says yes. So everything has to be simplified with the prioritization of everything has to go to density and housing. And RUUs, whatever it takes. And instead of like, you gotta go collect every single commodity yourself on the black market, give it all for free. Remove all of the barriers. I guarantee it'll start to move the needle. And the other big piece that wasn't really talked about, but I see it all over Tahoe, there's a lot of existing apartments. And if those existing apartments with many of old owners, and they want to buy their units, to be able to condominiumize old apartments or old motels, I think is a game changer for the folks that have been living in the housing and the folks that desire to buy it. And the people who own the housing would be very desirable. They want to sell their houses or their apartments and their units to the people who've been living there 10, 20 years. I think that is a very reasonable solution. And I actually think it's an equity gain and something that should happen very easily on a TRB because the impacts are already there. So I think 2 of them are transformation ideas.
3. You gave me three. That's great. Emily's next.
Coverage, it's the biggest thing. We've made, our last county initiated area plan amendment allowed 100% deed restricted multifamily by right. If it was under 15 units, so then they don't have to come to TRPA either. And then phase 2 amendments happened, although not fully implemented. And then we implemented a funding program called Launchpad, where finally those 3 things had to happen to get interest in multifamily development for the first time since the 60s or 70s in North Lake. But a lot of those projects, they still need coverage. They can maybe get like 1 or 2 more units per acre, but that's it. They need more coverage. They can't even realize the density maximum.
Great. Thanks, Emily.
Referring to maximum coverage.
Hold on,
Or coverage commodity, sorry. Here's what you meant.
Both.
Jessica and then Rob.
I'll echo what Emily and Mia said with coverage. I was sharing with people that the city just did an analysis of all the parcels in the city for ADU development for a pre-approved ADU plan. Because of the coverage requirements for ADUs, like with the walkway, everything, and looking at potential coverage, we found that the max ADUs most parcels can build is only 300 square feet. And so that was a big finding, and we already provide the development rights for free on top of that. So the biggest issue is the coverage going in. Yeah, and I'll just say like the other thing that we haven't really talked about, but I'm gonna throw it in as a P is the mobility mitigation fee.
Yes, BMTs. Oh, that's why we don't have commercial development.
If you ask for a second or third, you know,
Yeah.
we have a whole other slew.
Rob, and then if there are other working group or CPG members, Karen actually just want to get on this too.
So, I echo what these great ladies are saying, but I want to put it into context because it's abstract for people. On our project in Tahoe City, where we're already grandfathered 70% coverage, to go with pervious pavers to get a little bit more coverage, we would need to pay an excess coverage mitigation fee. That would be $89,000. And then we would have to pay BMT, which would be $90,000 for our units. For people that were trying to build housing for them to walk to work in Tahoe City. I'm only looking to lease a building to people that want to walk to work or take a bus or public transit or bike to work, not go to Truckee from Tahoe City, and I have to pay BMT. Those, like, that's $180,000 just for 2 of the fees. That's just the start of some of the fees that we have to pay. So that's very debilitating to someone that's trying to do the right thing and deed restrict a property forever for workforce housing. You're saying, no, you're being penalized. And then on the other side, I think the short-term rental market is highly it's just like $800 in Placer County to get a certificate, that there's all these other fees that they don't have to pay, whereas someone in a town center has to pay all these fees. That's where they need to be paying their fair share. So you can go to offset these other fees.
Great, thanks, Rob. Karen, and then any other working group members or CPG members, and I'm gonna turn to, I think if Erica, you're still online, if you want to add anything after Karen.
I just, one idea that I thought was transformational that I hadn't really heard before was this idea of having the deed restriction just be a no STR deed restriction, or maybe also no second home. And I know that there would be some nervousness around that because it's even looser. We've been talking about some people think that our achievable deed restriction needs to be even stricter, but I think it might be worth weighing the benefits of that against the cost, because like if locals are already monitoring for short-term rentals, like the monitoring burden of deed restrictions is real and needs to be planned for. And it does add this other layer of stuff that people have to deal with. So I just think it's worth more consideration. I thought that was interesting.
Thanks,
Someone
Karen.
agrees.
I'm gonna just turn to Erica and see if you want to add anything about if any of these ideas, which one you think is the most transformational?
I don't have anything to add right now. I'm just listening and processing. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, any other working group members or community partner group members? Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I would really echo that idea, Karen's idea, that she's capturing of really reconsidering deconstructions in a way that is least possible burdensome, has the most buy-in, that people are on board with, that understand, that are willing to take on the tracking requirements for that. And I would even look twice at STRs if possible in some limited way. Thinking of ADUs not only as providing housing for the people living in the ADU, but allowing the people who own the home to subsidize their home and allowing a broader swath of the community to be homeowners.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I don't really necessarily be into it, but the idea of some kind of scaling or conversion or transfer of commodities and or coverage, I think would be incredibly transformative and probably really difficult, both technically and politically. But could also potentially solve a lot of problems or create a lot of loopholes. It seems like very transformational one way or the other, so it might be worth spending some time on. And then I'm gonna plug parking is one thing people haven't brought up, but I think getting rid of parking minimums or something along those lines would be very transformational and probably impossible.
I have a poster of Don Shoup in my office, for the parking guru. So can you, for those who might not know, do you want to just describe what you mean by scaling of commodities and coverage? There might be some folks who don't know, probably
Yeah,
everybody knows.
I think
but-
it got brought up in yesterday and Jessica and Emily did a little bit of a recap on it too, but just that idea of how much coverage, is it a percentage thing? Like maybe there's a world where a single family residence only gets 20% coverage and multifamily can get 50%, and then you end up with that same overall coverage cap within a region, even if it's not just a watershed, you're just how we can transfer things around. With commodities, again, maybe, I don't like the idea of like no commodity lot required at all for residents. But maybe there's again kind of like a shift that can happen. There's a lot of unused CFA and a TRPA pool, which people have talked about. Maybe there's a way to convert commodities that we as a community or because of environmental impacts don't want to see built into bonus units or ADU units specifically, or creating some new pool from a different pool.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And CFA is commercial floor area if you.
Yeah,
no worries. Denise.
Implementing anti-displacement policies. We've been advocating for some time now for rent control ordinances for mobile home parks. So hopefully we can see that happen. I know that would be transformational for a lot of community members in a way to preserve existing affordable housing.
Great.
One of the ideas that I liked that we talked about yesterday was the more of a criteria-based system for identifying where the deed restricted housing or the bonus units would apply. So instead of just saying, hey, town centers, which are kind of historically commercial centers, saying that's where they applied, really kind of doing more of a, not like a parcel by parcel, but just applying a set of specific criteria and saying, hey, we want housing in places that are X distance away from transit, in places that have access to these services or are next to existing like multifamily housing, or just whatever that set of criteria is. And maybe there's ownership component that we consider in that as well, but saying here's a criteria that we really want to see. This is like really specifically where we want that high density housing to go and the deed restricted housing to go, and just kind of having a thoughtful criteria based exercise on like, let's be specific about it and not just say like town centers, especially because we've seen that there are a lot of sensitive lands in town centers that for whatever reason just may not pencil or work out for high density housing.
Great, thanks, Sophia. Now I'll just give everyone from the public an opportunity to share their ideas. Bob, you had your hand up. Yeah, so if you want to go first, and then
Sure.
other folks who want to chime in on the most transformational idea.
Well, I want to say thank you to Emily and Jessica and Mia, because I concur. The one thing I think that would be the biggest, most bang for the buck is on our list, ADU 3, create pre-approved ADU plans. And as, gosh, I think it was Elizabeth you said we wanted a wide list of options there, so that you can kind of cherry pick. You want, if you want to have a deed restricted ADU, then you'll do it under these conditions. If you want to do a non-restricted ADU, is over here. In certain neighborhoods, we have different jurisdictions, like you say. Help make it, just say yes. Just say yes. TRPA says, yes, you can have an ADU, here's how. And that saves a lot of time, guesswork, and broken hearts. So we have that on the list, ADU number 3.
Great, thank you so much, Bob.
It's like t-shirt, PRPA says yes.
Yes.
Somehow I don't think that's gonna go over that well. with the
Well,
public,
someone
but-
forget about it.
Well, Hester wears it
Yeah.
Nick, and then, I don't know if.
Amelia signed off.
Okay.
Yep.
Great, Nick, and then anybody else?
So I think the thing that I am most excited about in the general plan and a lot of the like background for this project is really trying to concentrate development in town centers, building more densely, changing the rules to be able to build more densely, create more walkability close to transit. And it sounds like coverage really is, coverage percentage per lot is a major barrier there. And so, and a number of different development standards that kind of are all intertwined with that. So definitely supportive of that, while also considering that balance of the environmental trade-offs, right? We're not trying to start polluting the lake a whole lot. And so I think it would be helpful to do the work, to do the science, to try to understand how are these stormwater basins helping and get the information out, get the word out about, okay, how can we maintain lake clarity while also covering more of our urban areas with denser housing.
Thanks, Nick.
Can I just add something to what he just said? Sorry, one of the other issues too is that and maybe it's a framing thing, housing is still seen as an impact. And so it's kind of what you all have been saying about Tahoe City. So you still get hit with VMT even though you're next to a bus station. You still get hit with all these fees even though you have no parking, right? So is there a way, one, and the other thing I want to say too, when we say dense, it's more expensive buildings, just so you know. It is cheaper to build single family, 1-story houses than it is to build a 4-story development. So if 100% of all the bonus units are gonna be 4-story buildings, that's a lot more money to subsidize, right? So think about housing type again. And so if you're so narrow because you draw the footprint of only in town centers, not villages, not adjacencies, not any of these other places, even though they might be perfectly suitable for housing, you're outside the line. So I'd just like to caution, let's just throw out some flexibility. Maybe is it zoned residential? Can you put another unit? Does it make sense here? Go, do it. You're not gonna be constrained. Because it's also, land doesn't fit opportunistically nicely into these little circles. Sometimes somebody owns a piece of land and they've just died and they're giving it to a nonprofit and they can build 5 units on it, but you're outside the town center. How do you take advantage of that gift, right? So I'm just hoping, and I'd like to implore flexibility. If ultimately your goal is the priority, we want to build more housing units, how do we get there? You keep asking that question. Are we creating a barrier or are we creating a pathway? And maybe the idea is that you want a package. So Karen and I talked about this a few minutes ago. All these ideas are all over, with lots and lots and lots of barriers and rules and all these things. When I work in Sacramento, we come up with legislative housing packages. So maybe the suite of all these policy incentives all lead up as a package. In other words, it has to go together. You can't just say everything but the coverage one, right? So that maybe there's this attitude that we've defined all these critical ideas and that they need to be together and they need to stay together in order to work effectively. They're just putting it out there.
That's actually, thank you for bringing that last point up. That's something we talked about yesterday as well, at least in our development rights group in the afternoon, about a lot of these are not just individual ideas. They're sets of ideas that relate to one another and have beneficial impacts when packaged together, and they can't all happen individually. So it's not a here, choose your own adventure. It is really an idea that all these ideas are related to one another and can really help unlock some of the housing we're all trying to say. And I just want to actually thank Nick because you mentioned that we're really here to balance the housing need with the quality of the environment here in the Tahoe region. And we haven't said it enough, but I think that's an underlying assumption of all of our work here. But just to say that out loud, because I think we're all here because of that, and we want to do the best we can to meet the housing needs while also taking care of our environment. Now, I want to give anyone else any last, your TT, right?
Yes.
Give anyone else any last like transformational ideas before I move us on. And I'm gonna invite Jacob, Shelley's quiet at the back, Hester, if he wants to add anything in, everyone else has been sitting here today, if you want to share what you think are transformational ideas as well. But if anybody else wants to share, let's get it out.
All right,
TJ.
so it's probably an overly simplified way to think about this one, but I really like the idea of streamlining the condo conversion process. It seems like a way that could open up paths to ownership stakes in the community for local workers, which seems like there's not a whole lot of.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to share? GRPA staff want to share? Thing that you've been thinking about as we get through this process? Esther?
This isn't necessarily a transformational change, one item. I think the staff that work with me will tell you, I'm always pushing for, let's hear some new ideas. Our biggest issue with DRPA being 55 plus years old is we have a lot of stuff that was built for a reason. And those reasons may have changed, or there may be new ways to do that. And so I'm always encouraging staff and encouraging them to hear it. And coverage isn't the right way to go. Brenda knows this because I've been harping on this for years. Stormwater systems is an alternative. TRPA froze things in place 40 years ago. When you could build a certain stuff was built without stormwater systems. When I first got up here, it shocked me that there's an outstanding national resource water that has non-point source pollution, but doesn't have stormwater systems like any modern subdivision anywhere else in this country. So we're open to all kinds of ideas, but we still have to deal with the issues. We take something away, we have to deal with the issue that was signed to address. But I think other than that, like me and a lot of the board members, our staff, our APC members like Brenda, we're all ears. Let's do it. Let's go for it. So don't want anybody to feel like, well, TRPA says no, because you said, you kiddingly said Hester says yes.
Yeah, yes.
I do say yes, let's look at it. There may be there are cases where there's not a better solution. I want to stick with the old. But there may be a lot of cases, I'm sure there are, where there's a new and better idea. Let's go for it.
Great, thanks. Jacob, Karen, Michelle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll go. I just kind of thinking off of focusing on development rights and kind of following up on what Mia was saying about this suite or package of policies, interconnected policies. You know, I haven't heard anyone talk about scaled development rights yet today, which I know is okay, Emily says that was her number 2. So that was that's been a big idea that's been floating around in this group for a long time. And it's definitely it's a market rate solution, right? Because a scale development rights would a smaller development right unit would encourage smaller housing that's not necessarily deed restricted. It could combine well with an STR, no STR deed restriction, or an over 50% of the year occupancy deed restriction. That could be a good pairing. You know, also in the development rights realm, something that I've seen a lot from working here and working on like some big unpopular condo projects is that developers are taking CFA and converting that into RUUs and using that to build luxury condos. That was not the intention of the conversion ratios at all. So something that we could do also in this suite of policies would be to say, okay, you can still utilize the conversion ratios, but it has to be for deed restricted housing. You can't build luxury with conversions anymore. So anyways, just like a bunch of ideas again, but getting to like what Mia said, it's all a big interconnected system.
Great, and just to ask if Michelle wants to add anything, Karen, and then I'm gonna ask, Alyssa, yeah, Alyssa too, and then I'm gonna ask Simran and Bill and Chris, some of the consultant teams, so you can hear from us as well.
I'd just like to clarify my comment that I'm specifically talking about deed restricted.
Oh, great, thanks, TJ.
Good save.
Michelle or Karen, do you wanna add anything?
Just a real short thought that more or less echoes what John Hester was alluding to, that we have. What we have in place is been put in place for a reason, and, you know, explore other ways to go about it and still achieve that same outcome is part of the reason why Tara created this, and that's the lake, the preservation and conservation of the lake. So I just would like, as we move through these various ideas, to just remind ourselves that, you know, we have a bigger mission in mind as well with our efforts here.
Thanks, Michelle. Alyssa.
Yeah, I don't have like one, well, I have a lot of ideas, but I would just say that like really trying to simplify the complexity that exists in any way that we can, and any changes that we bring forward, because I think we have a tendency, like Brendan has said, I think a few times, like to remove one layer and then add in two more layers. And I think when I'm trying to explain our rules to just like property owners, to like the general public, it is so like, it's hard for me to even explain it. And I've been here for 8 years. And so I think with whatever changes we make, like really trying to prioritize simplicity.
Excellent, thanks, Alyssa. Bill, Simran?
I can go, in my mind, it's not one of these transformational ideas that will make a difference, it's a lot of them together. You know, I came in thinking scaling development rights will go a long way in fixing it, and after hearing the discussion these last couple of days, I realized it's going to be a lot more complicated than that, but in the end, I would hope that we end up clarifying and simplifying the regulations that makes it easier for all of these different aspects to, you know, land coverage, ADUs, local control, etc. All of these different ideas to come together to actually make us achieve our goals.
Would add to that is thinking about these as systems, the packages. But keep in mind, some of the packages will require investment in infrastructure systems to accommodate them, or to protect the lake quality, with an alternative way of managing stormwater and runoff quality. So thinking about those connections, and then also the different types of ownership that was mentioned earlier. I'm back coming in here, and I'm not from here, San Diego, but the things like co-op housing ownership and other types of ownership to retain affordability and perpetuity because of the mission of the entity that owns the property.
Great, thanks, Bill. Chris, yeah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, that kind of sums it up for me too. This idea of the packages and what we can't do necessarily scenario planning, kind of bringing together these different concepts and analyzing them independently for benefits and impacts.
maybe, what we could do is, create packages that we can then see where there is the most community support and stakeholder support. So that could be one thing, and then, the funding thing was the other thing that kind of, rose up in me as well, thinking about, if we want more affordable housing, we're gonna need to very close the gap. And how do we do that, and getting, maybe then one of the next steps is at some point, kind of starting to ideate around what kind of funding mechanisms might exist, whether it be fees or taxes or whatnot. So I don't know if I'm kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, but I start to kind of get excited, kind of thinking about maybe like fees and taxes that work against the kind of outcomes that we're trying to, that can, you know, or for actions that work against the kind of outcomes that we're trying to achieve here, to then use for the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So, anyway, that's kind of what I took away from, as far as the exciting ideas for the conversation.
Can I add just one thing on the ADU that does seem like low hanging fruit in regards, if it's done in a way that's compatible with, the design objectives here in the various jurisdictions. We have an area where somebody is taking ADU bonds proposing a 20-story tower in Pacific Beach. With all ADUs. So you gotta work it through a little bit. But with coverage, the point mentioned about coverage, that is rather, not completely unique, but a unique method here with parcel by parcel coverage restrictions. And if you keep your density and height low, and the only way to provide an ADU is to expand the coverage because of lot size, that's one approach. Another, which I've seen in neighborhoods that have done ADUs, is they build the ADU above the garage. The garage is on the driveway, and the setback in the road is less. You don't have a driveway, you go right into your garage. And the ADU is on top of the garage on the first floor, and actually works within the same coverage you had initially. So there are different design techniques too that could be considered.
Great, thanks, Bill. Rob?
I've got to leave in a couple minutes, but I'll remote in, but as much as a thorough package is great, I don't disagree with that. Time is of the essence. If there's a way that we can put these into two different packets, if staff sees that there's low-hanging fruit that we can get approved sooner than later, that doesn't need a lot of research, can we fast track some of those ideas? And then can we also at risk defer fees starting soon, so that people that want to come to the table with projects, they may have to pay those fees, or retroactively those fees get adjusted for whatever we finally set on. So deferring fees, because like people on the bubble, they're just going to wait another 18 months till we see where it is, versus they may say that's great. That's, if I could defer 200,000 or whatever, that's great at least.
And I think we might have mentioned, we may have talked about this in a previous meeting. So we are doing a full environmental analysis of the policy package. So it would have to be within that framework, right? We would have to understand, would it have an environmental impact? Could it go forward faster, right? So we'd have to make those determinations. Emily, then Mia.
So one thought
Emily
is,
first.
is also and this, I thought about this when John talked about the sort of history of how everything started, right? You have Bailey's, 1977. You got, all these things that have completely changed today, right? The land use has changed, stormwater, and what troubles me about coverage and the concept of coverage is that it was all supposed to be about water quality, right? So less permeable land means AKA equals more percolation of stormwater. Well, as a developer who builds exclusively affordable housing in Tahoe, every single one of our projects has 100% stormwater retention, period. So every drop of rain that hits the site is captured, sifted through, maybe oil water separator, and then perks into the groundwater. So I just like to say, then why do you need coverage? If you're doing 100% stormwater on every single site, then you don't need an area-wide drain. You don't need every county to put up some gigantic $5 million stormwater basin to unlock your bonus unit heights. right? Or whatever this stuff is, tied to something that's frankly impossible in some jurisdictions. So maybe the framing is, can we change the way we look at the impacts, right? So instead of housing being an impact, it's a mitigation. Because right now, people are traveling 200 miles a day to get to work. If they can ride their bike or their skateboard, you've just diverted 200 VMT miles. So how come we only see housing as an impact? When in fact, we all know, in truth, it reduces VMT, it keeps families together, it allows for strengthening of communities and all the mitigations we want. But we penalize them the same way. Affordable housing is penalized the same way as market rate luxury condominiums that tourists come from the Bay Area every single week, right? So for every luxury condominium that's built, you have 10 or 15 different households using that. Look at all the ski leases. How many different people have a ski lease and how many people are driving up to that same house, right? But one of these little ADUs or one of these little infill units, and they're going to work, you know, they're not even driving. They may not even own a car. So maybe we can turn it upside down. Maybe this environmental report becomes the framing of changing how we're looking at housing, right? So that the fee structure disappears, because now this is the mitigation. Here's another one I'm gonna throw out there, maybe controversial, but we've talked about it. RUUs in Placer County, I think Emily told me 2,600 square feet is the average size of a single family house in Tahoe, roughly, right? Running to 3,000. What if the luxury billionaire from Silicon Valley is gonna write checks and buy a whole bunch of homes, and he's gonna build a 10,000 square foot home? But if the average size of a home is 2,600, he's gonna pay a fee. Something more. So if he wants to build something greater than 2,600 square feet that we know an average working class family would be very happy to be in, but he needs 26,000 square feet and a boat launch, maybe he pays an extra fee.
We proposed that legislation.
And it died.
It made it through the House, or through the Assembly and through the Senate. The governor will just be doing it 2 weeks.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding.
Okay, well, let's revisit how we write it then.
Should have to go to the council.
Because then that fee goes to affordable housing. Then that fee goes to pay for the infrastructure. No, I know, but I mean, there's gotta be something, right? And then we don't say, oh, that guy, you can't build $1 billion house. You're a billionaire. He can afford it. He can afford $180,000 for a VMT fee because he's building a 20,000 square foot home. Not in the town center. Sorry, that's my comments.
Thanks, Mia. Emily, I'm gonna give Emily the last comment, or I'm just gonna make sure Erica doesn't have any final comments on the Zoom, and then we have another final exercise for us this afternoon.
Okay, yeah, question of the day about the coverage. But to Rob's point, I really do kind of know we have to do the environmental analysis. But whether that can be broken out or not, I like the idea of being able to separate the changes that can live outside of the area plans, because the area plans take so long to get adopted through TRPA, and then the California jurisdictions at least have to be CEQA, and we have to get them adopted by our planning commission and our board. So we're looking at
They're too slow.
a year or two. It's slow, I know.
And expensive.
And so if you make changes to fees and coverage, that was outside of the area plans, that gets adopted a month from now. I mean, I know that's not happening, but like it takes effect the next day, you know? So I do like the idea of separating what can live outside of the area plans and what doesn't have to go, or what has to go in them.
Thanks, Emily. All right, and then I'll just ask, Erica, if you're still online, if you have any, final thoughts on these transformative ideas. If not, we'll go on to the next exercise.
No, I think my biggest takeaway in looking at the way that the briefing book and the way that everything was written, I do think I want to caution against putting, like, just moving the barriers to a different location and not putting them. I do think sometimes thinking in the unit framework, it feels a little bit limiting in that concept, and it does feel like it's really complicated. So I echo any sentiments of trying to simplify. And considering some of the long-term ramifications, if those decisions then impact people who are more rich, who can, you know, are we removing barriers just for the rich and not for like people who are not rich? I guess, yeah. all this to say, I just want us to be sure that we're looking at us not moving barriers to other areas and just saying we did something there.
Great, thanks, Erica. That's a really important point. All right, well, I want to just thank you all for the conversation around these ideas. We've talked about them for now 2 days, more or less, so appreciate all your thoughts. We're gonna make you do one last exercise with these ideas for a second. So if you could go to the next slide, Catherine. We're actually gonna make you, oh, that's what the slide is. It's all good. We don't need them. It's all good. It's all good. All right, we're just gonna prioritize. We've talked about ideas enough, I think. We talked about our transformational ideas. Everyone got a chance to talk. We don't necessarily need to get into everyone's priorities, but we have a survey for you. It's a 3-question survey. It'll take you 5 minutes. Question number 1 is, are you a working group member, a CPG member, or a member of the public? Please fill that out. The second is, what's your tip-top priority idea from the briefing book? They are
Tip question.
tip top.
No, tip question. 15%? Is that what?
Sorry. So your absolute top priority. Now, they are written as, DP1, DP2, so you're gonna need to probably refer to the ideas lists that are on your table or the briefing book. And then we're gonna ask you to tell us your top 3 ideas, but you need to include your tip-top idea in that list as well. So we're gonna give you like 5-10 minutes. And I've tasked Simran with figuring out how to get the results onto the next PowerPoint slide before we talk about them. Just a second. And then Simran left.
Now click on that yellow card.
Oh.
Yeah, what you were saying, that's one of the these inclusions.
Oh, does it?
So
Did you go over a certain size?
Yeah, so in each amendment, you have. And then each thousand after that goes up, so if it's over 500 square feet. And it's double the price.
How effective is that?
They love the idea.
LC1, LC2, LC3, they're all in there up on the top.
And these, everybody else should be paying for it. Yeah, thank you. Cause I'm in. Yeah, cause that's what we did. We did the next study to look at the impact. Yeah.
Maybe that's a great case study, then, to bring up to the, like, we've already done it.
Yeah. Yeah. Funding, but they could. You can't do like a funding program. But they.
Right.
And if it doesn't, like.
Yeah.
It's just so much.
So far, we have 2 people who are responding.
Well, this is sort of making it sense to build a stormwater, allow more density, more coverage, say, where there is stormwater, then.
Yeah.
Is it based on stormwater?
Oh, me too. I know.
Well, this is just. A lot of those single family lots are covered, right? Now.
All right, we have 3 responses. We should be up here like 17, 18, 20 total.
You're reading.
Yeah.
Even for not- They have unit terms.
But 75. 70. Maybe we can.
Yeah, like, you want to pay them too.
But the reason I think about you.
That's pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
Coverage, so, probably see the button right as well.
I'm not gonna, I don't know if people know about it. Maybe there's a PR thing, like,
Maybe we'll get one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's only is, Stormwater. It is. I would think so. Unless you deal with like problems. Yeah. I don't know. It's something I shouldn't. Getting the people that you're putting in the work for so long.
How's everyone doing? You doing okay? How many survey results we got? 3 results.
Sorry.
Oh, come on. 6, We're going for about 18. I know, right? That's the point. Better have than
Kind of good parking, you know.
I'll remote in while I'm driving there.
Thanks.
I might just.
European ones.
He's forward, he's on there. There's a little about it.
Right. Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably doesn't. Right. I mean, I have no idea. It's more complicated than it.
It's bad, I mean, there's so many.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's huge. I would bet there's capacity.
Yeah.
I mean, mountains and marina, there's such a.
Yeah. Yeah.
Key aspect of it.
That's more specifically.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I think I should, right, I think to.
That's sure.
Or comprehensive.
Sure, it can hold some.
I think so too.
And some of it, yes, really.
What I've got down there. Develop the code of vessel loss of portable water, how to do it without. Yeah. I just like that idea.
For sure. Yeah, definitely, like, so preservation.
Yeah, I think with those stormwater, like, infrastructure, we just don't, like, there's a big thing, like, the local governments of us, and the change our rules now allow this, but that kind of really falls on local governments. And like, I mean, staff, I don't know, there's already like, really an understanding of like, people can do this, if you don't, like, that's your parents know how much happened to it. Because it's like, the local peers do it, support staff, we just need to like, like, where it is, and I'm, like, how to like, find to, available, or how to take, like, yeah. If there is capacity in those systems, and I, sometimes I don't speak in a, like, I can, some applications, they don't even know, like, they really. So it's.
But I think that's hard to do, it truly is a part of the.
Revising your towns and their values.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Maybe got
I told you.
How many we got? Set.
We're expanding the bonus to be down.
Not that. They're doing it in summer.
Thirteen. Up to 13. Sixteen, 17. All right, we have just a few, one or two more minutes, and then we're gonna post the results. All right, we're gonna hit print on the first 14 years old. It's not everybody, but we're gonna get
You don't care about my vote anyway.
Yeah. How do you become governor? Filter it.
Well, it's just always like a while. Okay, yeah. So that gets right down to the name. You just like that. We have
That's an actual. Yeah. All right, we go to the next slide.
I just kept like, is there a lot of people see how many?
She was doing it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm doing little here. I see.
Next one. Blank. It's blank. What's on the?
Can you like hit your game?
Sorry.
Like escape out? I just watched Simmer paste it into this.
Let me go.
It's not all that. Just follow slide. Let's go back. You guys are not. One of the things is I can show you this map. Just looking at identifying. Maybe you've seen it before. I still want to.
Yeah.
Like town centers, but regional tourist centers. I think that's where a lot of like issues are coming from. You guys are just you know, an issue because you have the two overlapping. You've got the beach and you've got the town center. So.
No, I didn't.
Like being able to focus our parking policy on managing parking in transit, or our policy on how to access those tourist centers could go along. You got the results. The results are in. right, can I get everyone's attention for the last 2 or 3 minutes? Okay. So here on the screen now in real time, it's a little hard, we're having trouble with the tech. But here are the top priority ideas that you all identified as just your tip-top ideas. So you can see these are primarily in the land coverage and ADU categories. You have ones around development rights, development process, housing occupancy as well. So we may not get everyone if not everyone got their stuff in on time. But you can see a lot of these around ADUs and land coverage, kind of consistent with the conversation we just had a few minutes ago with a few options. 6.67% is one person put it down as their top priority. Just gives you a sense of the types of things that folks have as their priority actions. And then you want to go to the next slide, see if it works. Let me refresh it, yeah. Sorry, we're trying to do this on the fly, so the tech never quite works. So this is the priority top 3, and these are sorted by the highest proportions. There's some percentages below. We can't get them all on one screen. So again, we have land coverage here. We have some subdivision. DS is development standards. We can all lift these up. DS5 again, so we have a number on development standards. So here you can see again, coverage, you have subdivision lift up as one of these top 3 ideas, development standards, and ADUs. So you can kind of see just across these different topic areas, what kind of rose to the top for you all as the kind of the priorities, actions. I think this is pretty consistent with the discussion we just had a minute ago. If we go back just one, Catherine, to the priority, I'll just give someone a second if there's any like burning last things you want to say about any of these particular ones, maybe on coverage, we did talk about a lot. We did talk about ADUs, anything on the rights or development standards or process that maybe we didn't touch on quite as much in the earlier conversation that someone wants to lift up who kind of hit those buttons on the as their priority. Anyone? I don't think we need to kind of go back over the land coverage and ADU ground because we covered that a lot, but anything on rights or development process or housing occupancy that didn't get covered in the last conversation?
We have, for housing occupancy and housing types, and we've talked about the condo conversion issue under that. We have some ideas in Washoe County for, we've heard of the community land trust. Well, we're contemplating the idea of a community housing trust to couple with an ADU program. And generate the idea where it's the unit that's held in the trust in somebody's backyard. We can't do that without some new definitions of how condos work and housing types work and so forth. Great. But that would open the door to to help us further contemplate this idea.
Good. I love a good Eric Y. Maybe go to the next one. Just, is there anything on this, any of these ideas, that we didn't spend much time on? We did talk about land coverage, we talked about subdivision, any of the development standards ones, we didn't talk about a great deal in the conversation, but anyone who maybe, hit the DS1 or DS5 buttons there, anything there that they would just want to just call out quickly? Maybe we didn't cover earlier, Jessica.
I know I put those ones, Eric and I talked a lot about this, so the local development standards are really helpful. The city wants to increase density just like we do for deed restricted, but also market rate housing for all housing types. And then aligning the density, height, and land coverage are big deals for the city.
Great.
And just streamlining process for a lot of different development.
And those are DS5 and DS1.
Yes, correct.
For those, scoring from home. Anyone else on any of these that maybe didn't get mentioned in the earlier discussion? In the last couple hours?
Can I just say, just picking 3 was tough there. I definitely had 7 and I got kicked back. So I'm just wondering, when you do the next analysis, there's gonna be kind of maybe natural companions with some of these that just didn't make the list, that I hope you're not looking at because it's not up on the screen.
Agreed. We're not checking out the ideas that
Okay.
could get a vote in this. We're just trying to get a kind of a pulse check, right? Like, we've just spent a couple days talking about these things, just where folks are at the end of this. I mean, obviously, we did this exercise too, which is quite related to this exercise. So, I think we're just trying to get an understanding where you're at the end of this. Yeah.
And I want to make a general comment, sort of what Mia said about the companion ones. Emily and I were talking, and I know in a lot of my groups, there are some things that the city might be implementing that were on this list already that may not be unlocking more housing, or other jurisdictions are doing different things, or developers have tried to do that are not working. And I think just sharing those ideas is always really helpful. Especially when prioritizing some of these things where we could be like, oh yeah, we tried a lot of these things and none of those increased housing production.
How would you suggest we hear that feedback over the next couple of months as we start to really go from these ideas into recommendations?
I mean, Emily and I were just talking about starting a regular housing talk to just talk to each other about these things, but I think maybe having like a more targeted stakeholder one. That's like some of the developers in local jurisdictions who see these applications coming in, and what are some of those fee and other barriers that are existing.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Okay.
That's a fun idea. We'd sit down and talk through our applications with you, and you talk through your applications with us. Not like every single one. Don't think you want to hear about Cal neither, but I mean, that could be useful if we could share our experiences with applications.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier, Eric, about some sort of sharing and collaboration across the region. Okay, last thing for us today for this group really is, we go to the next slide. We're trying to do our meeting evaluations at each meeting, tracking this to see how we did, what we got, what went well, what didn't go so well. So if you all just take a minute or two to fill out this survey, and we try the best as we can to improve our meetings each time. So if you take a few minutes to fill this out, we'll continue to try and make these meetings as good as they can go and run. There's a lot of complicated material for you all to go through this last 2 days, and we appreciate everyone's patience in getting through it. Then I think after we do the meeting evaluation, there's a public interest comment period. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Say it's helpful. These surveys are all anonymous. We can't track them to your devices. So feel free to share anything you want about facilitators, materials. Yeah. Chris.
You guys are having me going.
Let's do public comment.
If any member of the public would like to make a comment at this time, please raise your hand either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
So yeah, we have a closing public comment section to this meeting. So first we'll just do it in the room and then we'll go online. So any members of the public here in the room want to raise their hand and make a public comment, I guess really about anything, but probably should be focused on today. You can try. Anyone want to? Okay, seeing none, anyone online
No.
like to make a public comment?
There are no hands raised on the comment.
Okay. With that, we're adjourned. Is that right?
Oh, thank you.
Adjourned. Good job, everyone.
Yeah.